Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am one of your hosts for today, John DeLynn. It is September 13th, 2022, and I am so honored to have the wise, the brilliant, and the lovely Margie DeLynn in the house as my co-host for today.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah.
So happy to be here.
You kind of produced this one. You kind of set this one up.
That's right.
Yeah. And this is a couple that I've been wanting to interview for a very, very long time. Today we have in the studio the official gunkles of Zelf on the Shelf. We have Gary Horlocker and Ernie Horseman's-Hoff. Hey, guys.
Hey, John.
It's Gary and Ernie.
Yep. Not Bert and Ernie. Gary and Ernie.
Gary and Ernie.
That's right. But when people call me Gary, I don't correct him. He's really smart.
Yeah. Gary and Ernie are in the house. And for those of you who are post-Mormons here kind of along the Wasatch Front, if you've attended any of my karaoke events, if you have attended many Thrive or Mormon Stories workshops or retreats, you would have bumped into Gary and Ernie at some point. They're much beloved. They've also been, involved in Mocha or Coca, which are kind of ancillary groups of the women's of a certain age community. But they're a beloved couple here along the Wasatch Front. And they've been dear friends of mine in one way or another. I mean, you could even say since 2004, actually, in one way that we'll explain maybe in a bit. But today we are going to be kind of telling a love story. And the main theme of today is, let's just say you're living the Mormon dream or the Mormon nightmare or something in between, and it all kind of falls apart. And you may be not in a relationship, or you may be in a relationship that falls apart. And let's just say you reach kind of your midlife in some way, wondering if you'll ever find love, find a companion, and find joy. Today is a post-Mormon love story that is inspiring. Is that okay if we frame it that way?
Sure.
You bet.
I know I hit the lotto with Gary, so.
Yeah, that's what you're going to get today is a post-Mormon love story to give you hope and to inspire you, but also to hear from two beautiful humans. So again, Gary Horlocker and Ernie Horseman's-Hoff, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Anything you want to add or correct to the introduction?
Well, I think we're so much more than just love. It's like, I don't know, it's just like friends and travelers, and I don't know, it's just,
Yeah.
I feel so fortunate for the way our life is, so blessed right now in our life. It's really great. So anyway, we'll get to that.
Love is just one of many facets of your relationship.
There you go. That's what I meant.
Yeah, and we tend to feel, humbled and honored on the fact that a lot of people that we know in the ex-Mormon community have literally sought us out because they want to show their kids or others that you can have a successful gay relationship and be in love. Although I think when it comes to what makes a good relationship, then sexuality isn't the issue, but rather
Compatibility, companionability,
all that kind of stuff.
lots of stuff.
There's part of me that didn't even want to mention that and just say it's love. It doesn't matter what kind of love,
Yeah,
it's just
right.
love. But it's also true that especially coming out of Mormonism, our LGBTQ Mormon youth and young adults and even older adults need hope and role models too. But I would never want to limit your love story to just LGBTQ people. That's why I didn't mention it.
Great.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So both. How about both? Both and. Does that sound good, Margie?
Good yes and.
Yeah.
We love it.
Okay. Yeah. So, we're going to hear about so much today. We're going to hear about both of them, their Mormon stories growing up here in Utah. Both of them served missions. In Ernie's case, he will have entered into a mixed orientation marriage. We'll talk about that. In Gary's case, he was holding out. He was living that celibate life. And then in their midlives, they found each other. And then we're just going to talk about what have been, how they found each other and what it's meant to each other, to find each other, and what have been the secrets of their friendship and their companionship, because they've inspired so many people that I know. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Is that all right?
You bet.
Okay. All right. So Ernie, you might be a tiny bit older than Gary. Is that fair to say?
Yes, 14 years separates us. So
So maybe we start with your Mormon story. Is that okay?
You bet.
sure.
Okay. So Ernie, where does your Mormon story begin?
Actually begins in Holland. My parents were originally in Indonesia, went through World War II, suffered a lot, concentration camps, prison camps, political refugee camps, and then they got out of Holland, apparently to Netherlands, I think, to avoid a bloodbath, made provisions for those who were associated with the Dutch and Christianity to get out. So they went to Holland, and when I was a year old, that would be 1955, there was a knock on the door. And probably everybody knows who that is, and it was the missionaries. And from what I've learned, missionaries weren't very successful in Holland at the time, but they seemed to have success among these poor Indonesian immigrants in Holland. So anyway, they joined the church.
Now, total kids in your family, really quick, is how many?
11 kids.
And where are you in the birth order?
I'm number 5.
Okay, so you're
Five of
year
11,
after-
7 of 9. You know how that goes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so several kids into their marriage, they find the Mormon missionaries while living in Holland.
Right.
Okay.
And so in 63, after becoming members of the church, the Dutch government petitioned the United States and said, hey, and I don't know if people know, but Holland is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. So they said, hey, could we have some people immigrate to the United States and we'll assist them? So my dad went in and applied, and basically they said, well, Mr. Horstmanshoff, you got to have a sponsor. You've got 7 kids. This might be hard. And they said, where do you want to go? And my dad, just like everybody, at least people he knew, would say California. And they looked at his form and they said, hey, it says that you're Mormon here. You need to put down Utah. He said, okay. So he puts Utah down. Apparently, these papers came to an individual whose last name is Teerlink Jewelry in Salt Lake, who was the Dutch consul. And he got that. He said to his son, hey, look at this. And his son said, who was a missionary in Holland, Dad, that's the Horstmanshoff family. They fed us all the time. He said, good, we're going to sponsor them. So that's what got us to the United States. Salt Lake City,
Around what year did your family come here?
1963.
Okay. And by that time, how many kids?
7,
Okay.
4 more were born in the United States.
Okay.
There's an explanation, I think, behind that. My parents came from a third world country where your retirement are your children. See, and I had 3 and only wanted 2, so I thought I might sell one of them, but, it was hard to decide. My daughter always said, but I'm your favorite daughter. True, she's my only daughter. So anyway, so that's how we got to the United States.
What was your what was the native language spoken in your family?
Dutch.
Dutch. That was the
Yes.
first language of your entire family?
Well, believe it or not, when I came to this country, I knew 3 words. I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and they were yes.
3 English words.
3 English words. Yes, no, and maybe. So I could
still-
answer any question.
Do you still speak Dutch?
Oh, ja, natuurlijk. Yes, I
Okay.
can speak Dutch.
So that's your native language is Dutch.
It is.
Is that common in Indonesia for Dutch to be the primary language spoken?
Well, in Indonesia, of course, primary language is Bahasa, but Indonesia was a Dutch colony for over 300 years.
Okay.
So that kind of explains the story of how my parents got out after World War II. They lost everything and then came to Holland. And then after the missionaries and the Mormon and the opportunity came to the United States, that's how we got to Utah.
Okay. Fascinating. Okay, so you settle where? In 63? Is that right?
Yeah, Salt Lake City, 23rd East, in an 800 square foot home. Go figure.
Holy 800 square feet with like 11 people?
Eventually 11, that's right.
One bathroom,
One bathroom.
the 2 bedrooms, the parents and the girls, right?
Right, and an unfurnished basement, wall-to-wall bed, you know.
Is this house still standing?
Oh, yes, it is, on 23rd, when you exit, you know, the freeway. I pass it all the time. They've neglected it since, but it's there.
Okay. And what high school is that?
Well, I went to Skyline, but when I say that, for those who are familiar with Salt Lake City, we were the poorest of the poor going to Skyline.
Well, I guess, is that kind of Olympus Cove? What is the part of Salt Lake that?
Mill Creek, right. It's right up on the east side. And if you're familiar with Salt Lake, the east side tends to be more prosperous and
Up against the bench, East Bench kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Is that Gordon B. Hinckley territory or not?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So your Mormon home growing up, was Mormonism interwoven into your family culture or not? Or
Well, I would like to say that I think my parents were like relaxed Mormons. You know, it wasn't orthodox, it wasn't rigid. And when I hit teenage years, I got totally inactive and running around with kids, and some of them didn't graduate from high school. But after high school, my brother went on a mission. And I think that at that stage, you know, when you're kind of young adult and you want to know what the heck to do with your life, I got really interested, studied Mormonism, and kind of went overboard and activated a lot of my friends. They were all inactive. And so, you know, of course, that's going to lead up to a mission, right?
What jobs were your parents holding down? Was your mom also working? Was it just your dad? What types of jobs?
Well, with 11 kids, my mom was working
that's what I
at
thought.
home
Yeah.
all the time.
Yep.
We did have cleaning part-time jobs where the entire family would go. So I would go, I still to this day can run a buffer with a pinky, cleaning the floor in the Kennecott building in Salt Lake. And my claim to a little bit of fame is when Hoffman, you know, did the bomb at the door, I used to clean those floors.
Oh, is it the Judge Building or what's it called?
I forget, but, you know, you remember that incident with the bombings and all of that
In the office
stories.
building or the person?
Yeah. Well, he'd left a bomb at an office building and the wrong person opened the door and I think it killed him. But anyway, so I was familiar with that building. And actually, Hoffman is kind of a cohort age of mine. I have a friend who I think served on the stage crew with him. So some familiarity there.
Okay. So your dad's primary job was?
He was in food service, United Airlines.
Oh.
And back then, they had a fancy kitchen in Salt Lake. Then they closed that down, and he ended up moving to California in his later years and came and retired in Salt Lake. But my dad, as far as I can recall, until when he was in his late 50s, always had 2 jobs. You know, supporting the family. It was tough.
And you're saying your mom was primarily stay-at-home mom, didn't also have some type of source?
Except for
the cleaning,
helping him on the cleaning jobs downtown, various buildings.
And so the typical Mormon upbringing with like family home evening and scripture study and family prayer.
Not so strict in our household.
Okay.
Although, you know, my dad wanted us to go to church and so we would. But like I said, my brother got active. I was inactive, but I got very, very active after high school.
So would you have attended primary and done Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts and youth?
A little bit of primary, not so much Boy Scouts. You know, that the Eagles next to me, I think I might have made it to a tenderfoot, you know, so. But very familiar, I guess maybe because of my studies with Mormonism, its histories, and based upon the interview that you posted on the, 15, 20 years ago, where somebody that did 3 stories and one of them was about my family. You get some background of how immersed I was.
Mm-hmm. How were you treated as, let's just say, ethnic minority? Is that fair to say in the Salt Lake
Absolutely.
in the 60s and 70s?
Absolutely.
Were you considered a white kid? Were you considered a minority? How were you viewed and how were you treated?
I think I was considered a minority, but had very little type of incidence of where I felt there was discrimination. I will say this, getting a little ahead. When I was on my mission and was with the president, serving the president, and there was another elder from Hawaii who was about 6 feet tall and Chinese, and the rumor went around that the mission president had 2 bodyguards because of our looks, I guess.
Oh, okay. How were you treated, though, by, in middle school, high school, by the Mormon kids around you?
I don't think it was a problem. And possibly that might be maybe my personality. I try to make friends and things of that nature. So, but I think it's a fair question because I do know a lot of people. I have a very diverse family, and I mean diverse racially, from African American to white to Asian to Hispanic. One day you're going to have to come to one of our family parties. Matter of fact, I have a nephew, very brilliant, Diogenes, and I swear, I've always told him if they ever do a documentary on Obama in his 20s, then he's got to be the one.
Oh, yeah, it looks like
And
Obama.
people have told him that all the time. So again, but I have experienced through them some of the tough times they've had in schools at Olympus and being kind of seen as not only different, but often kids will be kids and get discrimination comments, such things of that nature.
But you were treated well.
I think so. It's never been really an issue for me. And Gary's often said, I might racially be different, but in my mind, I seem to be quite American and English-based.
Yeah.
Culturally.
What were you, just a few things, what were you into in high school? Like things that, your passions, your fun, what types of things were you
Hilarious
into?
question because I wasn't into high school.
Oh.
I don't know if I should mention this, but I did well. Believe it or not, grade-wise, it was a different time. But I remember my senior year and the very end, and I was going to graduate, and the English teacher, even remember her name, Vivian Knowles, said, "Ernie, come on in, come on in." I said, "What? What's wrong?" She said, "You need to be grateful." I said, "For what?" And she said, "Well, we defended you against the vice principal. We said, there's no way this kid's going to graduate with having missed this many days." But I graduated anyway. So, just to give you some background there, my life at that time was more probably running around, doing things I shouldn't, kind of wild teenager. So I can't say that my involvement, so to speak, of getting active in the Mormon church helped in a lot of ways. And maybe a sense of values and direction, although the direction part now is no longer part of my life.
I think you were mentioning, too, how hard it was at Christmas time and when teachers would ask you who your friends were and, some of those stories.
Well, I guess so, because my life is going so well. And this is interesting because I thought about this. I realize that I specifically recall growing up 2 times when I lied. And I'll start with the second one. A high school, had an English teacher, same teacher actually, sophomore year, and she said, "I want you to take a piece of paper, everybody in the class, put your name in the center, put a circle around it, and then draw lines to all your friends and put them in." So I just made up friends. Now, there's a positive aspect to this because now if you ask me to do the same exercise, I'd say, "Can I have some more paper?"
Because you have a lot of friends now.
Now he's got real friends.
The other memory, though, was in church. It was Christmas Day. That happened to be the same Sunday. I was in 6th grade. And the teacher said, "We're going to do without the lesson today and give everybody the opportunity to say what they got for Christmas." So I just made it up. It was difficult.
Because your family didn't.
Well, yeah, we barely had any kind of Christmas. It was hard, with that many kids, my dad working hard, and I'm not looking for empathy, but it was just reality. But it just, all of a sudden I was on the spot, and all these kids are mentioning all the nice things they got, so I just made it up.
Did you work in high school, have jobs? to earn money?
Yes, I think I always had part-time jobs. I've almost worked all through my school years. Even into law school, I would work sometimes. So, and I think, I attribute to my parents, especially my dad, which something seems to be a trademark of all of the Horseman's Hofs, is work ethic. So, and I'm grateful for that because it's gotten me in a lot of places because I think that's what you're supposed to do when you work, work.
Yeah. Okay, this is fun. So Margie, any, up through high school, do you have any questions for Ernie? And then we'll jump over to Gary and we'll kind of hop back and forth a little bit.
I think I'm good right now. I'm just enjoying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Thanks for sharing so far and being vulnerable.
Sure.
All right, Gary, let's talk quickly about, your same questions for you.
Let's see. I'm 6 of 8. So we were a kind of very different family than Ernie's family, other than the fact that we're a big family, which was pretty poor based on the number of kids and stuff. But my parents were both raised in America, and so the culture was not an issue. Mom was always trying to get us involved in school programs, very involved in our having a great childhood, and I don't think Ernie's mom knew the system and how to be involved with the kids at school and sports and music and all those kinds of things. I guess I was a serious child. I guess I'm still serious sometimes. I need to lighten up. But at 12, I was very involved in sport and in Boy Scouts. All my brothers, I have lots of brothers, and my mom would keep a folder of all their merit badge work with the answers to all the questions. So it was really easy for me to get my merit badges and order the arrow. We did Indian dancing, and in high school I was in the band and the choir and the show choir and in the football team and in the wrestling team and in the track team. And so I was very involved in high school, unlike Ernie. And
this is Orem.
Orem High.
Were you athletic?
What's that?
Were you pretty athletic?
Yeah, I just guess good genes. I had a strong body for my age, and I don't have the competitive thing. Some of my other brothers are much more competitive than I am, so I would have probably done better in football if I had been more competitive. Wrestling was an individual sport, and I seemed to do better at wrestling over time. I picked up genealogy at 12, and that was...
What the heck is that?
I know.
Genealogy, I am doing
We took a sharp left.
So, I tried not to tell any of my peers at school what I did at home. It was embarrassing to be a genealogist. That's for old people, and that's a religious thing. But in Mormon culture,
how did you,
that
as a
wasn't a cool
12-year-old,
thing.
get interested in genealogy? Like, was it about the stories of the people or just extracting names and dates?
Well, my mom was doing it, and her mom did it, and I've got some aunts and uncles that did it. So when we did the merit badge, I kind of figured it out.
What merit badge?
Genealogy merit badge for Boy Scouts.
Okay.
And so then I picked on the pedigree chart. There was an ancestor named King Cole, and I thought, that's a weird name. Is that really a king? Or, is there somebody King Cole? What is that? And so I thought, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to find out everything I can about this King Cole. And so I ended up writing a book. We'd made 2 trips back to Michigan and Ohio and Nebraska where the people lived, and I sorted out all these families that had intermarried as they lived together as a community, and I published this when I was 16.
What?
And by the time I went on my mission, I had about 5 or 6 more books that I had published, a second volume to that one. And I had done a lot of interviewing too, but these people they're all long dead now. But at the time, I got all their stories down and transcribed them and put them into these books. And so
now I know about Nat King Cole. Did they share a common origin?
I think his name was Ezra when I finally found
King Cole.
somebody that
But
was.
were they both named after some King Cole kind of thing?
I've never really. I want to go back to that now with the DNA. So genealogy has changed a lot, and the DNA is really fun because you can sometimes break through things that couldn't be solved with just records.
But you didn't find some common source for that name?
No, it's still a little mystery. I'm saving that one for retirement.
Okay.
Anyway.
How important was the gospel to you and your family, the Mormon church? Oh, wait. Would you mind explaining to kind of our never Mormon listeners just the reason, doctrinal and theological reasons why Mormons are into genealogy historically?
Yeah.
Just in a succinct
I always loved it because it's like problem solving, and it's like a great problem. I used to like puzzles, but now this is like way better than a puzzle, trying to figure out who this person was. And so anyway, that was my motivation. But in the church, it's doing baptisms for the dead and then other marriages for the dead.
Maybe just back up and explain that doctrine.
We have the one true church, even though Joseph Smith started it in the 1830s and later. And
don't get spicy on me.
Sorry. Well, you know all this better than I do. Anyway.
So you have to have a baptism from the one true church.
Well, what about all those people that died and weren't part of the Mormon church?
If you died between Jesus' death and 1830 when the church was founded, there's 2,000 years.
All those people are just in limbo and they're just waiting for us.
And all the people before Jesus, they all need a Mormon, in effect, a Mormon baptism, right? Yeah.
So in a way, we get honored being a genealogist because this is a job other people don't want to do that they're supposed to do as a good Mormon. And so they're like, put you on a pedestal, like, wow, you're so good. You're doing that? And it's like, well, I wasn't really doing it for that reason, but it was like an extra, it's like male privilege. You get a privilege without having earned it. And so I just kind of enjoyed being kind of that religious kid, but I was also very serious. I went to all the seminary
Sorry. I want to connect the dots.
Okay, so please.
If you, and most of you already know this, but for those who don't, if you don't get a Mormon baptism while you're alive, you're not going to make it to heaven, and so you need a baptism after you've died.
Right.
And that's what Mormon temples are for.
Oh, I see.
Because in Mormon temples, we do what are called baptisms for the dead, where I might go as a member and get baptized in the name of someone who's died. But you need someone's name and their birth date, and you need to establish their identity as having lived so that then you can get baptized for them. And then they'll be in the spirit prison kind of limbo thing and being taught the gospel because they didn't have a chance to learn it while they were on the earth. And if they accept the gospel in spirit prison, then if John gets baptized in the name of Jose Guadalupe, who is dead, then they can accept that baptism and then go to heaven.
Right.
Is that right?
So we need genealogists to find the names of all those people and the relationships. And so we're all responsible to find our own ancestors.
It's almost like missionary work for the dead.
Right.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's like getting converts, but of dead people.
Right. And they say that we'll be saviors on Mount Zion or whatever, but we'll be held up as these heroes in the next life because we saved them from, just like Jesus saved people, the genealogists and the temple people are saving people from eternal damnation or whatever. So,
and all that's awesome, and none of it was your motivation, you're saying?
It wasn't my motivation, but I'm sure I kind of like smiled and thought it was nice to get extra strokes, but not from my peers.
But the Mormon Church is kind of like one of the world leaders in genealogy. So even though that wasn't necessarily your motivation, being born and raised in Utah with a mom who was into genealogy, you're swimming in knowledge and resources that probably made it easier for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I used to love, sometimes I ride my bike from Orem, northeast Orem, down to BYU to their genealogy area and look up census records and things. And I used to I'd always pester my mom about ordering a death certificate or something. And she'd go through the family finances and show me how little there was, but there was just this little bit at the bottom that she'd let me have, and it was kind of crazy, but
some kids are into comic books and some kids are into genealogy.
It was very embarrassing. I didn't want anybody to know.
I think it's super awesome.
It is.
Thank you. Anyway.
Well, and I'm probably interrupting you to get way ahead, but he is a world-class genealogist, probably the world's expert in the Scandinavian countries, where Sweden even turned to Ancestry, to turn to him so they could find out stuff on people they wanted to do stories on.
Ernie likes to brag about me.
Oh, because he won't brag about himself.
Oh.
I do European work now for Ancestry, and I did work for the church. That might come up again, but
so you're a genealogist now. That's part of
that's
why I'm
my
asking
job,
about it.
and the DNA stuff is really fun. I do European research. We have a lot of other people, and there's 12 languages that I translate in the Scandinavian.
Now he's bragging.
I do Dutch. I do Czech Republic.
Does Ernie help you with the
Finland.
Dutch?
I always show him, and he's like, "Oh, what is that?" And so we try to figure it out together. It's kind of fun.
This is awesome.
I love that interest, curiosity, passion showed up so early, and like sounds kind of organic, really.
Yeah, my brain just loves it. But academics could have been another outlet too. I found that later. And I love the methodology and some of the mathematical part. Statistical analysis was kind of my thing.
So in your, let's just say, high school years, what did the church mean to you? How Mormon was your family?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add that I was really religious kid. So I read the 4 standard works as part of seminary, from cover to cover.
Wow.
Before my mission.
Even the Old Testament.
Yeah. Worked my way through it, like 10 pages a day until I made it through.
Wow.
Even all those, all the inventories and things, Leviticus. And anyway, so I feel like I understand what it is now. When people talk about it, they don't even know what they're talking about. But it did feel like a little bit of a competition, and I didn't like that in the MTC when people like Ernie would come in and be all gung-ho and had repented, and they were all going to be that perfect missionary, and here I was, I'd done it all my life. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I didn't like that competitive thing, who's going to be the best missionary and keep all the rules. But anyway, I grew up in Orem, northeast Orem. The Osmonds were in our stake, and we had Neil A. Maxwell had a daughter in our ward, and my dad was very religious. He was kind of to a fault. He wouldn't let us watch shows that, like The Love Boat or Fantasy Island. I don't know. That's
Dukes of
my
Hazzard,
generation. He didn't
too
like.
edgy.
Yeah, if they weren't married, they shouldn't be implying things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sex, very sex phobic, I think, and anyway, it was just.
Love Boat had nightcaps, and that's just unacceptable.
Yeah,
you wouldn't even know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I didn't. In fact, I'm not sure right now, but I think I know. That's like alcohol at night, right? Nightcap?
Yeah, it's like, would you like to come in for a nightcap?
Oh, okay.
Like,
it starts with alcohol. My mom would watch from the kitchen if my dad was out of town, and we all started watching it. Then mom would kind of watch in the background. She didn't mind, but when Dad was there, we were not allowed.
That's interesting.
So we have a little bit of a difference there on the parents. But my mom grew up in kind of a dysfunctional family. She was a single mother right after my grandpa was in World War II, and they got divorced when they got back. So she raised 5 kids by herself as a single mother in the Depression years. And so those kids are all kind of a little bit more independent. And my dad was part of a very coherent family. His great-grandparents had come from Denmark in the 1870s or so, and so, they don't let you be a pioneer, son of the pioneers, unless your ancestors came before the 1860s, because the railroad, 1862, I think. So I'm not a pioneer, but I am like a fifth generation on some sides.
That's so dumb. You don't qualify.
You don't qualify.
Right. Pioneer
You're
ancestry
close, but no.
I guess they have to have it cut off at some point. Yeah.
Okay, so a pretty Orthodox Mormon upbringing then?
Yeah, and I remember getting a testimony of each thing growing up, getting the tingly in the spine. And, I remember reading each of the scriptures and getting a testimony of each of the scriptures. And I read a book on the presidents of the church and getting the tingly on each one of them as it told the story.
Like, check, I got the tingly on prophets.
I hope I'm not
I got the Book of Mormon tingly.
offending people, but, that's kind of the way I look at it now. But, it was like, oh, the tingle's there. Is it because I'm cold or is it because this is true? And I figured it was always true if it was, religious. But
okay. All right. So you got all the tinglies. All right. So you did seminary and all that stuff.
I loved high school. I loved dances. My brother and I, we were kind of inseparable through a lot of high school. He's 1 year ahead of me, and we were in all the sports and would double date to all the school dances and the church dances. They're kind of the same thing in Utah Valley.
So I'm gonna hop back and forth. So Ernie, I didn't ask you about dating and kind of attractions, because usually that emerges around age 13 for men. Do you want to talk just quickly about, did you date? Did you know you like guys back in high school? Did you
First, I didn't date. Ironically, and people are kind of surprised when they learn this about me as they know me now. I was kind of shy.
Because they think of you as a player now, but back then.
That was before he got with me.
They always assume I'm really outgoing, right?
Yeah.
But I generally wasn't. In high school, I felt just intimidated. As I say, we were the poorest of the poor that went there. So I was, anyway, but I did hang out with other guys who were from Mormon families, but who were inactive and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, smoking pot or drinking and things of that nature. But I never did any dating. And early on, at some point, I recognized my attraction to guys. We didn't even have the word gay then, but I instinctively knew that it would be not a smart idea to ever let that out. And interestingly, on my mission, you know how missionaries are, buddies, and I was in the office almost all my mission. We had one elder that would, jokingly twist your tie and choke you and pull you down off your chair. And I grabbed his tie and I turned it, and I didn't stop. I think about 3 or 4 missionaries took him off. He said, "You're going to kill him." And I said, "That's right." And there's an explanation to that. I was so worried that if I was seen as not masculine or tough, that it would, people would just suspect. So this was more in my head.
Sissy, they used to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a companion that we were both APs, and he was a football player, and he decided to wrestle me. And the next day, the mission president said, "Elder Sorber, where did you get that big bruise on your head?" And he said, "Don't wrestle Elder Horseman's-Hoff."
So you're saying you were kind of overcompensating
I think
to appear
so.
masculine?
Absolutely. I always feared, it's kind of hard to, I'm not so sure how that works psychologically, but I was very guarded about any kind of idea that I might be attracted to guys. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you definitely didn't. So you didn't date guys or girls growing up.
No, and I might have dated some girls, but it was kind of, appearances, I guess. Like, unlike Gary, I never went to a school dance, so I don't know what that's like. Now, that was then. My life changed after Mission and Rick's College, but, I didn't date very much at all, so.
Okay. So I'll ask you the same question, Gary. Yeah. What was, you said you dated.
Yeah. Well, Utah Valley is, we were like the kings of dating. I don't know. I don't think we missed very many school dances. And we'd always go group dating because that was kind of the thing you do there. So you get the men's dance, guys' choice dance, we called it. We would get me and my brother and maybe one other friend, and we'd all get dates, and we'd go to a restaurant and dance, and then take them home, or get ice cream and take them home. Anyway, it worked really great. It was fun. Dancing was fun. I loved to dance, and it was the kissing part that was hard, and so it was never a problem because we were actually encouraged not to kiss, not to be intimate. And, I could dance close to girls. It didn't do anything for me, but it was fun, and we had a great time. So my problem, it's just kind of like the inverse of Ernie, I guess. My problems came after my mission when I couldn't turn it on beyond that. That was what worked, and that was what was expected in high school. As far as the same-sex attraction, I just tried to pretend it wasn't there, tried to ignore it.
Turn it off. Pack it down.
Just kind of hoping that, I thought that I was a normal kid like everyone else. I remember, I could talk about times like there was a boy in the next class younger than me that was very attractive to me, and I always wanted to walk him home from school, even though it was out of my way, and it didn't really make any sense. But anyway, I wanted him to be my friend, and so I'd find people that were mostly minority student kids like Ernie, Hispanic kids. I kind of like to get to know better, but anyway, I never allowed myself to fantasize about it or even think that. I was always thinking that we were all having fun in high school. This was not the time to be serious anyway, so.
Okay. So, for those who aren't familiar, this you both would have been raised in the era of Mormonism where Miracle of Forgiveness by Spence W. Kimball would be kind of the prevailing view on sexuality, which would have taught that your core attractions were evil or perverse or an abomination. But it doesn't sound like either of you even had enough acknowledgement or insight to even feel some of that self-loathing because you didn't even let yourself get that far. Or
well,
am I wrong?
Let me respond to that, because I think that was one of the most psychologically harmful books that ever came out in terms of teenagers, the miracle of forgiveness and how it condemned basic human sexuality, and especially condemned any same-sex type of orientation. And at least when I went on a mission, everybody was required to read that. And I have met many people, straight or gay, mostly straight, who just had horrible self-esteem because of that book, and really suffered because they felt, they were not approved of by God because of, their own any sexual urges or anything like that. It's just so I just wanted to respond to say, boy, I remember that book, and I am so glad they stopped printing that. But it was really horrific. And then some of the ideas, if I may say, that the general authorities come up with makes me wonder what's really going on in their lives and in their heads. Because Mark E. Peterson wrote this pamphlet on how to, keep from pleasuring yourself. And then basically, in my opinion, it was almost like Bondage 101. I thought, where's this guy getting this idea of tying yourself up and mummifying yourself so that you could resist these urges? I just thought it was kind of crazy. And I don't know if you remember in Miracle of Forgiveness, but Kimball talks about, and I never knew this happened, and maybe it did. I don't care if it did, but guys getting together and jerking off, and that was sure to lead to homosexuality. And I'm like, where's this guy coming from?
Yeah, I think the book makes an association between male masturbation and homosexuality, that if you masturbate, it might make you gay. But also just like comparing being gay to perversions and bestiality and just really horrible associations. Yeah.
So would you say that you both were aware of those messages as a teen or not as much?
Pre-mission, I became aware and I read it, Incidentally, I had to be interviewed by a general authority and wait a year before I could go on my mission, so that was not as much sexually related at all, except for maybe my partying around and drugs and things of that nature.
I remember reading the book on my mission, Kimball's book, and I didn't really get it. So I was kind of, like you said, a little bit clueless about the issues they were talking about. But I also remember twice, at least in my childhood, looking at one of my brother's comic books or bodybuilder magazines and getting turned on at the images and feeling guilty for that. But I think my sexuality was more, like you've mentioned, John, that it was easier for me to control. Maybe I threw myself into the school and genealogy and just didn't have the typical, what you hear a lot of men are really tormented by masturbation. And that wasn't, I did remember going to the stake president and he's getting this, your interview to go on a mission. And he's like, so do you masturbate? And I'm like, I wasn't sure what that was. I heard this word. It was like some evil thing. But I wasn't sure if that's what I did when I looked at those comic books those 2 or 3 times. And so I was like, okay, I don't think so. And he says, I think you're lying. And I said, oh my goodness, he thinks I'm lying. Does he know something I don't know about me? And I was trying to, it just really racked me up because I knew I hadn't done anything. And so I went back to the bishop and I explained to him kind of all those details of those few times that I was turned on. And he says, oh, you're okay then. And so I went back to the stake president. I said, I talked to the bishop about that. And he said I was okay. But I wasn't even sure what the word masturbation meant. I guess we'd just live in a fantasy kind of a G-rated world down in Utah Valley. At least that was my world. And it was pretty typical of a lot of people, kind of a G-rated world. And you just group date and you don't ever do more than just, if you kiss, you don't do any more than a peck. They talk about, I remember all these young adult things talking about, what they call through the clothes? Petting.
Petting, yeah.
They call it petting. And so they're always talking about petting and whether it's hard core or light core. I forgot they had a word for that anyway, whether they're getting close to the edge or not. I was never close to the edge. We had this virgin lip club. That meant you didn't ever kiss a girl in high school. That was our big thing. But it was it was a fun, carefree time. But I'm sorry for those that really struggle. I know that my story isn't typical there.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have time to really dig into your missions, but I know, missions are always formative for Mormon youth, almost always. And Ernie, I know yours particularly was really formative from what I read in your outline.
I can succinctly address it and say that I had an unusual mission. 6 months into it, I was in upstate New York, and those who aren't Mormon, that is Mormon land, where it all happened, with the Hill Cumorah and the
Joseph Smith
display of the Cumorah pageant and everything. 6 months into my mission, our mission president had done his duty and left, and we got a new mission president. And he called me into the office, and without any formality, it took me a while to realize he was calling me in to be an assistant, and he never let me go. So
that's a real honor. It means you're basically one of the top 2 missionaries in the whole mission of 200 or 300 missionaries, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a reason why he did that, and maybe I just quickly share one thing. 3 months into it, this was a very successful individual. 2 buildings are named after him in Chevy Chase, Maryland. He was worth about $500 million then and had a personal friendship with Hinckley and would actually call him, and talk.
Do you want to say his name or do you not want to say his name?
Oh, Milton Allen Barlow. I think he's passed away now. There's the Barlow building in Chevy Chase and One Park North. Those are both his buildings. So he's very wealthy, very accomplished individual.
Do you know how he made his money?
Real estate.
Okay.
And poor guy came from Pingree, Idaho. But anyway, so he, 3 months into it, being his assistant, he called me into his office by myself, which made me really nervous. But he said, the mission president needs counsel. I'm like, oh, damn. I mean, I didn't say that, but I thought, oh, no. And I said, what's the matter, President? And he said, I've tried everything. And indeed he had. We had triplicate reports. I mean, it was just like run like a corporation. And he says, I'm failing. I guess I had an insight then because I told him, I said, President, you have so much to offer with your knowledge and experience, but missionaries don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And then he started to cry, but he changed him. And the second part of just succinctly addressing the mission was that I owe it to him that at the end of the mission, he said, there is no way you're not going to college. I've made a donation to Rick's College, and your first year is paid for. That started a journey for my family. None of us, except my one brother, also returned missionary, went beyond high school at that time. And so that changed my life. I mean, I went to Rick's, I went to BYU, I went to BYU Law School. It just kept going. And so I owe that to him, and that was really nice.
That's nice. That's super nice. Yeah, that's a real honor, and that must have felt great. And to go from, I think my brother had a similar experience, to go from being not really into church all of a sudden to like an assistant to the president within a short amount of time, that's got to be kind of validating and kind of help turbocharge your Mormon experience after having a season or two away. Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate. I enjoyed my missions, and I realized a lot of missionaries, if they're honest about it, it was really hard, and they didn't enjoy it. And candidly, I didn't enjoy proselyting, but I hardly ever did it. And a lot of missionaries were struggling with depression, anxiety, and often they would turn to me, and this is really awkward, but they kind of want to confess to me because they were afraid of the president. And I would talk to the president and say, hey, so-and-so needs to talk to you, but, be gentle. And my advice is, be loving, and everybody makes mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And apparently, one more thing, all the missionaries always seem to love having blessings from me because I'm the kind of guy that's going to tell you, you are wonderful. Your Heavenly Father loves you. You need to love yourself, and everything's going to be okay.
I think if we continue that life course of the trajectory that we started on, Ernie would be a patriarch somewhere giving blessings. So we did that interview, and they called us the Gaytriarchs. So that was kind of fun.
Beautiful. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Ernie. Gary, anything you want to say about your mission that was really formative or important?
I went to Norway, so the language has been a big part of my life ever since my mission. It was very difficult. I don't think... I don't know. I hate to say negative things about it because it's always like people tune out as soon as they hear something negative. Like, okay, I wish I hadn't asked this person. I don't want to hear any more of this. But it felt like a jail sentence, a prison sentence. And as a believer, I totally believed. I read through all the scriptures all again. I tried. It is a tough place. People there are nice, but they're just not interested in religion. And that, we just had something, we were selling something nobody wanted, I guess, for 2 years. It's a beautiful place. The Northern Lights were a reward on those cold nights when you're out in this super cold weather and there's no clouds, and then you look up and it's like, wow, it's like looking at the fireworks. It's a beautiful thing. So, no, I didn't have the greatest mission. I was a trainer. That's as far as I got. It seems like Ernie and I are kind of slightly different on a lot of these things. But Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. And I
Thank
can
you
tell
for
that's kind of
sharing that.
emotional for you. Yeah. I can tell that's kind of close to your heart.
Yeah, and I don't want to say anything negative because I guess it's taboo in Mormon culture to say anything negative, and people love their missions. It's their time of coming to themselves. I think like Ernie's story, you know, his high school was not that time for him. It was his mission that did it. So, and I don't feel neglected, and I think there are great things about my time. It's just the missionizing was not the great part.
So for you, it was, if you just wanted to summarize, you didn't like,
You know, I got a little tingly in my back that I should extend my mission. So I extended another 6 weeks at the end. And that's, I'm not going to get into that story. But so I really tried hard. And, but it was not, it was like kind of I don't know, it's counting the days. You know, when you start, 2 years is a long time to count days.
That really, really says something about your experience listening to the tingly, if I might say, that it sounds so rough, so challenging, so isolating in a way that you would extend. You were counting down the days, but you got the tingly, and you would extend it.
Yeah, I was definitely a true believer.
I'm sorry it was so painful, Gary.
Yeah, I like to hear the stories from South America, but I guess they had their own challenges too. It's kind of a different scenario.
Sounds like you're kind of saying just not a lot of people were interested, so you weren't having many baptisms, and so you're just kind of, it's drudgery.
You know, we knock on doors, and we pick, in the wintertime, we pick a big apartment building where you can be indoors, and in the winter it's a little harder, but we'd just go from door to door, and I remember it getting close to, I don't remember if it was 9 or 9:30 when we'd quit, but we'd just be like, I hope they don't let us in. I don't want to have to talk to somebody right now. And when we're outside, it's like you're so, you know, the cold is fine as long as you're still in the cold, but if someone lets you in, it all melts, and then it's wet, and then you have to go back out again a half hour later.
Yeah.
And nobody's really interested. I don't know. It just, it is different than a lot of the mission stories, I guess.
Yeah.
And you know, I love Europe now, and we've been back, and I love going there as a tourist. I think it'd be fun to live there. They have mountains, and it's just spectacular coastline. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, so you get home. Let's just say we'll go back to you, Ernie. You get home from your mission, and the thing to do, if you were told to do what a lot of us were told to do, it's to get married as soon as you can and have as many kids as possible. Is that kind of the instruction you got?
Sort of.
Okay.
I would say. I went to Rick's College, and definitely, like Gary, I was a devout believer by then. And of course, the idea of marriage. And so that's when I started going to dances. Kind of awkward to bring this out, but I went to a dance and saw initially what I thought, wait a minute, that looks like just a very handsome young man.
Blonde hair.
Blonde hair, blue eyes. Okay, we know my type, right? And her name was Cindy. And over time, she fell in love with me.
Now, what do you mean she looked like a man, or did I misunderstand?
She had a shorter hairstyle.
She looked like a young adult.
Okay.
Actually, you know, it was like ambidextrous or whatever you call it, where you're saying, wait a minute,
Androgynous.
Androgynous.
So
Okay.
like gender expression, maybe.
So her gender expression was more
Neutral.
It appeared that way to me.
So
No,
not
I don't
super
think she had a
feminine,
dress on, but
presenting
still,
us.
just her appearance. Even as I think of it, I still remember this. I was just like stunned, and I thought to myself, well, maybe this is my answer. Maybe this is what can work. So she, over the semester, it was clear she was falling in love with me, sending me a lot of gifts, and so I went to my then bishop, student ward, and that was the first time ever in my life that I disclosed to anybody that I had an attraction to men.
What year was this approximately?
Let's see, 1975, 76. 75 I started Rick's, I think, or 77, I think.
Okay. And you disclosed that you had attraction to men.
Right. We didn't even have the word gay then.
Yeah.
So I really liked this guy, very nice, trying to do his best. And he said, well, can I give you a blessing? And that's why I say I was a devout believer. And if you're a devout believer, well, of course you're going to say what? Please, yes. And in that blessing, he told me that I should go ahead and marry Cindy, not disclose it, my issue, and in due time, the Lord would reveal to me that I could, and she would help me. And so I followed his advice and got married. My second year, when I was at Rick's. And so that's how that started.
For those who would have no idea what this would be like, how could you summarize being married to someone that you might not necessarily be sexually attracted to? How was that for you? And I'm assuming some people can be bisexual, and so maybe you were attracted.
I think, and I like your question, because I know people that are on this Kinsey scale that are definitely like, if it goes up to 6 or 7, whatever it is, are an absolute 6. And I recognize I might be more of a 5 because of what you say. There might be a bisexuality. And Gary has noticed that when I find females attractive, you almost have to look twice and say, oh, I didn't know that was a female. And usually, that kind of might give you an idea. So, but I think it's a great struggle for many because as my story moves on, I was involved in gamma fights, gay Mormon fathers. This is after my divorce.
And we're jumping ahead.
Yeah. And I'm just saying that I've met a lot of men who were Mormon who got into marriages and had children and they'd have a lot to say to the question that you just posed that, yeah, it has its challenges.
But for you, you're saying there was, let's say you're a 5 on the Kinsey scale, which means you're predominantly attracted to men, but you had a small amount of attraction to women. So it wasn't, and then there's also aversion. It sounds like you didn't experience aversion.
No, I hear you. No, I didn't. I mean, we had 3 children, but still, the thing I think that needs to be pointed out, maybe that you're also kind of alluding to, is, and a lot of people think the idea, especially if they're very active Mormon, well, maybe if I do this and do everything that the Lord wants me to do, this will go away. And the opposite, in my opinion, happens. By not acting on it, by withholding, it only grows in intensity.
Michael Quinn talked about that when I interviewed him a long time ago. And I mean, one of the things I've realized is that one of the ways we do a disservice to this whole conversation is by reducing relationships to sexuality, because there are all sorts of different dimensions to a relationship. There's who we want to be friends with. There's who we want to have fun with. There's who we want to connect with. There's aesthetic attraction. There's
emotional attraction.
There's intellectual attraction.
Yes.
And so I guess your level of sexual attraction to your wife, your former wife, would only be one dimension of all the many ways you were probably seeking fulfillment as well. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And in many cases, not all, children make a huge difference. You love your children, and now you're busy in school. You have all of these obligations, but there's this joy of having these kids who rely on you, and that's part of almost a redemption, of, hey, this is hard, but look at these kids I have now, So I felt like, and now I do feel like I have the best of both worlds. I have children, I have grandchildren, and I have Gary.
I think sometimes these gay Mormons that have been in marriages, it's almost like in order to shut off their attractions, they also are shutting off their emotions, and so they're shutting off their emotions to their own children and to the wife that they do have, And so they become kind of like zombies. That's the goal, but that's not a life you'd want for the wife. I mean, we have such a male-oriented religion that we think about the man and we don't think about the wife and what she should have.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, that's important.
Good,
so,
Gary.
so you're attracted enough to your wife, you love your kids, and you're busy with your job and with church service. Is it fair to say you weren't super miserable in your mixed orientation marriage then, or you were just
I was not super miserable. I was frustrated. I have two gay brothers, and when I started to see their lives and how they had lovers or just were living joyously, that was hard. And I just kept it to myself, but that was really hard because I thought, wait a minute, they're happy. I mean, you get told in the Mormon church, sin and how bad it is and unhappiness and miserableness, and that's not what I was seeing, and that's not what I was experiencing with my brothers and their relation, and with my lesbian sister. I have a very unusual family, two gay brothers, lesbian sister. So
okay, that's a lot of LGBT in one family.
It was the water in that area in Salt Lake.
Yeah, 4 out of what, 9?
11.
4 out of 11 were LGBT that you know of.
Well, I would say a fifth one is what's it called? Bisexual.
I think it'll be interesting to see in the next generation or two in the Mormon church, but with large families, there's going to be a higher incidence, and the biological studies show that's higher probability with each boy in the family that there'll be a gay son. So
something to do with hormonal washes in the womb,
the mother's body is creating antibodies and stuff and feminizing the fetus, and there's these kinds of theories to explain it, but it does happen in a statistically significant number. So
that's awesome. Okay, so you were okay, Ernie, but you were frustrated that you felt like you were missing out on something. Is that fair to say?
That's a very accurate portrayal.
Okay. And really quickly, let's take it through to the marriage not working out. So do you want to
remember I had mentioned to you that blessing?
Yeah.
8 years later, I'm in law school. We got 3 kids. I'm very busy. And my wife, Cindy, Saturday morning, as we woke up, said, hey, I said, what's going on? He said, I could tell just from her face. He said, well, I've had a dream. And in that dream, I saw you, and then I entered your body and looked outward and felt what you felt. And I was like, okay, what did you feel? And she said, an attraction to men. Is it true? I'd never lied to her, so I said, yes, but I haven't acted on it. With hindsight, sometime later, I realized that was actually the beginning of the end of our marriage. And
what was going on there from her perspective, do you think?
Say that again?
What was going on from her perspective?
Well, I think what was really sad is she first thought that maybe it was her problem, not mine. And I was trying to assure her, no, it's, that she thought, hey, am I inadequate or something of that nature? Then also...
So she was feeling like you weren't that attracted, you weren't that into her? Is that what she was sensing?
She felt that it was a risk to our relationship. And not only that, I had forgotten this, but this is years ago, but apparently Cindy had called Gordon Hinckley. I don't know what position he held at that. And he visited with her and basically kind of gave her like the permission, okay, that, you could it's okay to end the marriage. And so we struggled with that. And actually, without detail, we did get into a divorce and we got remarried again, trying to make it work. And then I got a clerkship at the court and
in Nevada,
with a Nevada Supreme Court justice who was very LDS, very good guy, good man. And one day I came home for lunch and the wife and the kids. And then that evening when I came home, everything was gone except the bed and a few kitchen items. And I panicked and I called the bishop, and he said he didn't know anything about it. I learned sometime later he had orchestrated the whole thing. So it was a tough time in my life. So, but
Wait, I want to slow down on that. So your wife at some point senses you're probably gay. You acknowledge it, but you stay in the marriage. And within a year or two from that, your bishop is clued in, and you're saying your bishop and your wife decide that maybe the way to handle that was to have her just move out without
I'm
your
not
knowledge?
sure, I think it was her decision, but I think she went directly to the bishop. Actually, I need to say this too. She had gone to my justice that I was clerking for and outed me with the concern that I wasn't coming home. I was out there, late. And I think she probably thought I was messing around. But the fact is I was studying for the Nevada bar. So that was really a missed shot there. But what was also interesting is it was actually a horrific time. I couldn't find my family for about a month. However, I had contacted a prior bishop at BYU who knew us well, and he tracked her down. And they basically said to her, what you're doing is illegal. You need to make contact with Ernie. And interestingly, my judge, who is very active LDS, said, Ernie, you need to file for a divorce in Nevada, because if you do in Utah, it will not go well for you. And I think he took that position by that time because he just got to know me, so that made a difference to him. He knew I wasn't some scoundrel. And he had his own opinions about, I'm sure, the very conservative opinions about being gay or anything like that. But he counseled me and said it would be best, I think, if you got legal representation in Nevada. So that is what I did.
What was it like emotionally to come home to a completely empty house and your wife and kids having deserted you?
It was hell. It was very hard. I don't know why, but I guess we're all different psychologically depending upon what we've experienced in life, but I've rarely cried in my life. And I wept. It was really hard. And it was especially hard because of the kids. And my kids were really upset. Mm-hmm. And finally, also what happened is my daughter told me one day, because Cindy kept making up stories of why they had to go and Dad wasn't there, but one day she said, all three of us refused to get out of bed all day. Said, we want to talk to our dad. So it was pretty rough. And I think I'm able to talk about that now because my life's in a very good place. But yeah, it was hard. It was hard.
I'm so sorry. How old were your kids during that time? Approximately.
Let's see. We're talking about 8, 7, and 5.
And it's not like you were dating men privately and secretly.
No, nothing was going on while we were at the court.
Yeah.
But she had kind of suspected and then gone in, is that right? And then in trying to explore what you were doing or trying to find an answer, outed you?
I think when I reflect on it now is that, and I side with Cindy, it wasn't going to work. And she was looking for a way out, and she got empathy and help from the church or from the church leader.
I mean, if I'm trying to be empathetic for probably what she was thinking and feeling, number one, I think, Gary, you make the point that it's probably no picnic for a woman to not be truly loved and embraced and desired by her partner. So there were probably elements that were hard for her. But then if she was taught how evil same-sex attraction was, if she was taught the stuff out of that miracle forgiveness book that we talked about earlier, then to her, you must have been a ticking time bomb of, I'm going to say something really shocking, like a ticking time bomb of perversion and filth and awfulness that she didn't want to invest in any further. I know that's offensive language, but that would be a Mormon mindset in the 70s and 80s, I think.
I think you hit it on the nail. One of the things that was hardest, which eventually I got all cleared up, but was really painful, is she assumed that since I was gay, that the children were at risk of being abused. And then she suspected that it might be happening, and that just really fell through because it wasn't, but it was really hard to deal with those kinds of
associations. They would associate homosexuality with perversion, hurting children, animals, and even masturbation, gets thrown in there. So all those things is just taboo. Nowadays, we are able to talk about things. So
she was a product of the times, as you say, John, of how people thought then.
Yeah. And I saw something the other day that this is just a little bit unrelated, but kind of, it's what's more common to see in the news, a Mormon bishop abusing a child or a transgender human abusing a child? I don't know that we've ever seen a news story of a transgender child abusing a child. Here in Utah, we see it every month, a new Mormon bishop abusing a child. So that's just kind of one indirect way to kind of make the point that associating child abuse with any form of being LGBTQ is so out of place when there are much bigger, way bigger threats from a per capita perspective.
Yeah.
It's just completely inappropriate. But it was the water we all swam in growing up as Mormons, and probably not just as Mormons, but in the United States and probably the world at some level. It's just, this is something we've had to learn.
Yeah, I think it's still in the minds of some of our generation. I think some of my siblings still have those kind of reactions. So, hopefully, we always look at our grandparents and think, when will this generation die and we can move on? But it's hard to see that it's still there. And
that conditioning, right?
Yeah.
That conditioning just...
Anyway.
Oh, that's just so much to hold. So painful.
Well, and I was going to mention that in Gary's case, once we had started seeing each other and together, he had his youngest sister boycott a reunion because we were going to be there. So, and that was a while ago. Things have changed, but again, it was kind of like the culture then. She didn't want her kids to even, see Gary, and yet many of his siblings, he's tended to kids. They've had loving relationships, and all of a sudden that went south.
Can I ask you a question around that?
Sure.
Do you feel, how have you each dealt with grief and loss and the anger that comes from feeling so profoundly misunderstood, so profoundly, I would guess that is something that requires attention. I'm just curious.
I went to therapy. That helped a lot. But answering this question from the perspective where I am at now, I realize no one has an easy story in life. All of us are subject to suffering as being human, as well as joy. And so it softened me a bit. I mean, people often act out of good intentions, not realizing the harm they do. And I think it's important maybe to get past it or even forget, but it doesn't mean you have to not, you can still remember, and it teaches you to set boundaries, so that there's something to be gained as to avoiding that. And it's been painful. I think it's been more painful for Gary because he's had a really close relationship with his siblings, unlike I have closer relationship with my siblings now that we're older, very close. But Gary seems to have just really the kind of relationships I have with my siblings now. And he mentioned the brother. They did everything together. And one day we were running in the neighborhood and Gary wanted to drop off some chocolates at the house, and the brother's teenage sons were there. And he wrote an email, and in capital letters about half a dozen times says, "Do not ever come to my home unless I am there," and this was the brother he had done everything with. And so, yeah, it's painful. And
I think that there's a lot of rationality I use to deal with this. I realize that life is not fair. I realize in my childhood I was rewarded for a lot of things that were not, if I don't have the same sex drive as someone else, why should they feel guilty and I not, and feel like I'm special? And why should I feel special for being a genealogist when I really just love problem solving? And and putting puzzles together. And I don't know, I just think there's so many things that are just not fair in this world, and maybe it was time for me to feel some of that inequality and be the victim of it, to understand better the way Black people, Hispanic people, a lot of people are judged for things that are just totally unfair. And I think that, well, I'm sure we'll get into the family part of it a little bit later, but...
Yeah.
I did want to say, though, in response to what you had asked, Margie, what was a great help to me as well as others in my similar situation was Affirmation, which I didn't even know who that or what that was, Gay and Lesbian Mormons, had a newsletter, and my brother sent it to me. This is after my divorce. And in there was a little article that somebody said, hey, are there any other gay Mormon fathers out there? I would like to get together. And so we got together, 12 of us. As a matter of fact, that's where I met Mark, who I had a 13-year relationship with. He was one of the original, he came up with the term gamma fights, Nephites, Lehites, gamma fights. Only Mormons will get that. But anyway, that
stands for gay? Gay Mormon fathers?
Gay Mormon fathers. So everybody, and it was pre-internet. And this leads up to how I met Gary, because eventually...
Wait, we don't want to jump too fast.
Okay. So anyway, but I'm saying that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And almost twice a year, we would have retreats. We'd try to keep them budgeted, hold it in people's homes, and we'd have seminars on how to deal with divorce, how to deal with your children, safe sex, all that kind of thing. And that was a huge help on how do you deal with the grief, with the pain, and with the struggle of losing a marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, Will that was a great question, and that was a great topic, and let's come back to that. I don't want to lose the timeline a tiny bit, but that was important. Was there a part of you, Ernie, that was happy that your wife left you, and that you were kind of released from that marriage?
The word is relieved.
Not happy, but relieved.
Relieved in that now I had to make my choices and determine where I was going to go in life. And at that time, I was also very busy. There's financial obligations to support the family. I'm now starting my career, and I had met a friend who is still really close friends with us and now has moved to Salt Lake to be retired near us. But she was also clerking for a judge in Nevada Supreme Court, and we both ended up going to California, helping each other out. That is, I'd support her while she's studying for the bar. She supported me while I was studying for the bar. And so...
I think that he needed that. Marilyn, I should say her name. Yeah, it's okay to say her name. Anyway, she provided him with a safe place, somebody that understood and could give him support and help. I think, he would just lose himself gambling in Nevada, and, this just was a place where he could have easily just hit bottom and not come up again.
That's fair.
So Marilyn has been an important part of our family for what she did to help him through that stage.
So it was a simultaneous heartbreak and a strong sense of relief to be released from that marriage.
Of course, right, because now the first thing on my mind is, wait a minute. So now here I am. How old was I then? I don't know, 30, 40s or whatever, right? And like other gay Mormon fathers, okay, how do I date? How do I meet people? How do I, whatever. And, part of that is adventurous. Part of it is that, oh my goodness, gee, am I having feelings like a teenager has and addressing those things when you're young? It was also
awkward stages you go through, teenage.
But an exciting time of life. I tend to be quite social and get into groups. And before I knew it, I knew a lot of people. So that helped.
So you're saying it was scary and exciting, but I'm just trying to zero in on I guess you've already said it, just feeling relieved that you weren't in the marriage anymore because it wasn't meeting your core needs. Is that fair? And it wasn't meeting her core needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things actually I haven't said much about, but I really feel for Cindy and for the women that are in this situation. And that I had actually stated, I think, in the podcast years ago that I did, I said that I wish there was a greater effort, particularly in the church, to provide support, guidance for women in this situation, because it's very painful to them, and so yeah.
Yeah. So it probably wasn't great. And we've covered this in the past on Mormon Stories, and a lot of my dissertation work for my PhD was around quality of life for celibacy, which we'll get to in a second, and for mixed orientation marriages in the Mormon LGBTQ community. But quality of life was very low. Self-reported quality of life was very low for participants in mixed orientation marriages. Depression was high. Sexual identity distress was high. All the bad things were high and all the good things were low for people in these. And divorce rates were twice the national average. Upwards of 70% of these marriages ended in divorce. And I'm not even sure we could say the ones that didn't end in divorce were successes, right? No. So, I mean, there's been generations of Mormons of gay or lesbian Mormons that were kind of pushed or blessed or nudged into these mixed orientation marriages that just pretty much harmed everyone, including the kids in many ways, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And in some ways the church has kind of backed off a little bit, but in some ways it's still going on, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to share that. At least as I think about where we are in your story, I'm sad for your Cindy. I'm sad for you. I'm sad for your family and your kids that everything had to kind of blow up. But I'm also happy that both you and Cindy are getting a second chance to find partners that you really want to stick with. So I'm sad and happy at this part of your story, Ernie.
And where you can feel fully seen and be fully actualized and fully embodied as yourself in a relationship, as opposed to, have core pieces
trying to
of
be
yourself.
something
Absolutely.
different than, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Gary, your story was you went the celibate. Between the two of you, we're covering two main
two
paths. You went the celibacy route. Do you want to tell us about your post-mission? And
Yeah, I guess, and maybe this is not typical, I don't know, but the celibacy route for some of us at least is naive at first because we're just not thinking about our own attractions. We're trying to find somebody that will turn that on and make it happen, and we don't know necessarily that we're that different than other people. But in Mormonism, after you come home from your mission, there's a lot of pressure, especially on the men, to get married. And, we have all these single women in the church, and the men are just being jealous, selfish, I guess is the word. Selfish if they don't just grab one of them and get married. So I don't know, that's kind of the narrative that you feel. And I think it wasn't too big at 21 when I got back, but as I got closer to 30, it was starting to become a major problem.
wait, what happened in those 10 years? What was your life like?
So I was going to school. Linguistics was my major at that time, got a master's degree. So I always wanted to get married. I taught to pray for when the time comes to have a wife and children. Every day my parents taught me to say that, and it became a part of my own goals and identity, not knowing for sure what that meant. I mean, now I kind of have a broader perspective, but I definitely wanted all that. So I was a self-employed genealogist going through college. I had my own business. Then I got hired by the church. I was over the Danish collection and a consultant for European research when people needed help. And during this time, I had an uncle that had built houses in Nevada, so I went out to visit him to find out kind of from somebody that's done it. He says, you can do the house plans yourself. Sure, you can do this yourself. So I bought a lot, it was a third of an acre, end of a cul-de-sac in West Valley, and then for the next year I drew up the house plans, and then over the next 7 years I built this house. Basically would research how to do plumbing and I had a friend help me with the framing part of it, and we had a big work party when we had to put up the big beam across the top, and I was afraid we nearly killed my uncle when it broke loose for a little bit. But it was, anyway, this was my attempt to get this family, because I need, if I'm not married, I might as well build a house, and then there'll be a place for the family, and we'll build it with lots of bedrooms and 2 kitchens, and
4,000 square feet, 5 bathrooms.
Wow.
Build it and she will come, right?
Wow.
So we had this movie. What was the movie?
Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
If you build it, they will come. And that was kind of my thinking, that by the time I finished this house, then I would have a wife and I could start my family.
But what was, many of us just got home from our missions, dated, and then got married. What was kind of your
So I guess
obstacle?
I had this pattern over and over again that I would date for, go on 2 dates with different women, and after the 2 dates, it was kind of like, let's put off, I just say, well, I'll call you sometime. Anyway, I just didn't want to give her that kiss at the end, and you can't do more than 2 dates without starting intimacy with somebody, because that's kind of weird. And so I just didn't feel like, so anyway, this kept on going, and I thought, well, eventually, I hear stories that something clicks and you find your one true love, or somebody will be attractive, and I just kept dating and couldn't find anyone that I wanted to do the kissing with, and there's one point, I should tell this story, but I don't. Anyway, I was at the family history library working, and there was a gal that worked there too, and we'd see each other. And I've always liked, if you're not got brown skin, you have to have at least dark hair for my orientation. And so I'd always look at the women with and this long dark hair, just the beautiful gal, the way that I thought, well, maybe it would work with her. So I asked her on a date. And at the end of the date, she said to me that if I had asked her to marry her, she would say yes. And, this is the first date. And I was like, wow, maybe this is my chance. Where am I going to have a chance like this ever again? And so I went to the temple and I fasted, and I must have gone through 3 sessions, and I had some weird kind of insights that didn't make sense, but I thought maybe they were encouragements. That may be another story too, where you daydream something and you think you see a child, and, oh, I must have that child with this woman. But it was like she and I were in the pre-existence, and we were talking to each other, and she was trying to convince me to do something, and I kept saying, I don't think I can. And anyway, it was a weird thing, but I finally decided to make the leap of faith, and so I asked her, and I did it over the intercom at the family history library. So again, I don't always anticipate that everybody in the library that I know is going to want to come down and see me and see what her answer is. Anyway, it was pretty intense. But we got engaged, and I met her family for Christmas, and I broke it off right after that, because it just was kind of frightening to me, some of the family issues that she had, and I was afraid that I was going to be caught up in that. Her dad had visions and had a pre-lives where he was important people and in pre-lives, and they were creating an identity for me, and I just thought, like, okay, I can't deal with this on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. But what happened after that is it kind of led me to this depression mode where that was the closest I got, and how could I ever get that close again? Because that was kind of a fluke that she even was that, I didn't have attraction, sexual or intimate attraction, but I was kind, and she loved my kindness towards her, and caring, and except for maybe how I reacted to her family, that was hard. But anyway, so then I got depressed, and the house was getting close to being done, and I had to make all the decisions on the coloring and all these things that I had hoped that a woman could help me with. And so I was living in the basement. My mom was living upstairs, and I just, one part of the problem here is that Mormonism says we're on this journey, the hero's journey, and we're going to eventually become gods and goddesses, and we'll have planets. And it's like, okay, I made it to this life. That's a step. I got the testimony, I got the journey, but now I can't get married. There's no more, you can't go any further in this process without that marriage. And it was like, I was supposed to go through the rest of eternity as a single person. It's like, and then the way you're treated at church, like, here's a bunch of single women in this ward. Why aren't you interested in them? And I'm doing Boy Scout stuff, and I came home late, like an hour late one day. The boys had come over, and we had done this activity, and it was an hour past the time, and one of the mothers didn't know her son was going to come over after school, and she had created a hellstorm for me, and had complained to all the neighbors, and by the time I got back, even though there was legitimate reasons, in her mind, I had taken the boys somewhere and was abusing them or something, because she just let me have it and didn't stop for half hour. I don't know. The stuff that I went through, and I was a Boy Scout leader, a Cub Scout leader. I went through the training. I knew never to be alone with the boys. I was going to always keep those boundaries to protect myself, but just being a single man in that position puts you in a position that they talk about you and think things about you. And so anyway, that wasn't really the problem. The problem was I couldn't go any further on eternal progression, and I couldn't see any reason to live any further. I didn't want to die either, because that doesn't solve your problems in Mormonism. But I couldn't imagine living the rest of my life with a goal that I could never achieve. And so I bought some rat poison and a bunch of pills. I guess my mom found out, and she got rid of them. But that was kind of the low. And I feel like, as I think back, when you're so believing, you've had those tingles, absolute. I mean, you think absolute. You've got certainty. Those tingles tell me something is true. I'll jump off the cliff. Just, you tell me anything, and I feel those tingles. I'm going to do it because that's truth. And that's how much I believed in it. And so, let's see. Anyway, I was in this stage, kind of, the depression was getting worse and worse, and I was starting to plan out scenarios where I could do something about it to kind of end it. And a woman that I had dated once before called me up and said, "Hey, I'd like to go do this Timpanogos hike, and I'd like to talk to you. Would you be available to come go with this hike?" And so we were on this hike, and she's telling me about this Evergreen group that she and this other guy that she had been dating and engaged to had been going to this group, and I was just so fascinated by it. I just couldn't stop talking about it, and I she must have been obvious to her and to me that this was my issue, because I just couldn't stop talking about it. There's a place, there's a group, you can accept that you're gay without acting on it, and there's a place for someone in between being gay and being hetero. And so that was just the first time I needed a stepping stone, I guess. I couldn't go straight to the gay world. It was so taboo and so unthinkable that I couldn't do it. And
for those who don't know, Evergreen was kind of this nonprofit that, was around in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s that, was a community for gay Mormons, LGBTQ individuals who wanted to find some way to get support and to build community, but also it was a purveyor of conversion therapy or reparative therapy through folks like Dean Bird or even Dave Matheson or others.
Yeah, I used to get really bad reactions when I'd say I went to Evergreen, and because the gay world, it's reparative therapy. It's, I was analyzing why I'm not masculine enough. And it's strange because, here I am, have the same parents, the same environment as all my brothers. I did all the sports that they did. The only thing I'm missing was kind of farting and telling bad jokes, dirty jokes, and, all the kinds of things that you wouldn't want in a man. That, that's kind of the only thing that I wasn't really doing enough of, wasn't competitive enough. So, I'm thinking, why am I not gay? You have to kind of build your manhood. And, building your manhood means learning to cuss and learning to, I was just having a hard time. And then, but all I needed was a stepping stone. So it provided a place for 2 or 3 months. I read all the books they had. Eventually, I realized that it didn't make sense. And that even though I was in this place where I now had friends, that I should maybe see what this Affirmation group was about. So the Affirmation was the ones where they don't hold the church. It's not church sponsored. It's, but it is Mormon culture, and that's the commonality. And so anyway, that was, and then okay, I had this little tingly thing. I was like, okay, I thought, here I am, 30 years old, and I've never experienced anything. I've never had coffee. I've never had tea. I never swear. I never sex, never anything. And you're supposed to come to earth to learn by your experience, to know good from evil. And I thought, how do you learn from experience if you have no experience? Mm-hmm. And I thought, isn't it a shame that I kill myself and I'd never really had any of those experiences? And at least if I had an experience, I could then say why it's bad. And then I could at least learn from it and then choose the right way, whether that's celibacy or continuing to try to get married. So I said to God, they had a retreat for the weekend, and I said, I went a few hours early praying and fasting like me. It's like, okay, if I try and just go to this and open up a little, would you make it easy for me? Would you give me somebody that can be gentle and kind of help me? And I got the tinglies, and so I was all in for that. Anyway, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I had somebody I met there from Ecuador who was very gentle and wonderful. And then later I met somebody from Spain who was more sophisticated and exciting. And when I was dating the guy from Spain, I just fell in love with him. So I got all the in love chemistry that kids have in their teen years.
And was that the first time you
that was
really
the first
experienced
time
love?
I was on the hook. I swallowed it all the way down.
And you're 30 or 31 by this point?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was somewhere between 30, 31, 32. Anyway, so, oh boy, I think I scared him away. I was so in love. But feeling that thrill and driving down the road, I would get the tinglies. God feels this is, God approves. It's a beautiful thing. God is not judging me for this. He's celebrating that I'm feeling this. And, and then I think of another thought. I think I could be happy with this guy the rest of my life. And here comes the tinglies confirming the truth. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, I have a testimony. I wasn't.
That's when bad epistemology is actually helpful.
There you go. I don't know. Anyway, there's been some reconstruction since then. I guess you can tell by the way I talk about it. But anyway, it totally made it feel like, and it wasn't, to me, it wasn't that this guy was right. It was that God was okay with me and I can make my own choice. And so it was still a choice to me. Now I realize I have a choice. Should I choose to accept a gay relationship and go forward, or should I stay in the church and whatever that's going to be. You know, I still believed in it all. And so when that relationship ended and I decided to, I had been so in love that it took me 3 years just to get over it. And maybe this is what's dysfunctional about someone in their 30s having their first love relationship. But, you kind of have patience for kids when they're 16 and they fall in love, and it takes them till 19 to want to try again. Anyway, I decided to take advantage of those 3 years and go back to BYU, get a PhD in marriage, family, human development was my field, and make my decision. I was going to stay celibate for those 3 years and stick to the rules. And then at the end of that time, I was living in Salt Lake City in my house. I had my gay friends. We had our home evening group once a week. We had, was it once a week or once a month? I can't even remember now.
You had gay home evening?
We called it reconciliation, and we'd have like a home evening with a lesson and hymns and things, and everybody was positive about the church, but they were in different places. Some were living together and out of the church, and some were attending church. And anyway, it was quite a spectrum of people, but it was quite popular. We had about 35, 40 people come over to my house and sit around in a big...
35 gay Mormon men attending a gay family evening in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, and I was at BYU at this time, but I figured, I'm not breaking the honor code.
Yeah.
I'm keeping my celibacy, and so I was able to be...
I can't decide if that's terrible or awesome.
I think the kids down in Provo and Orem don't have that freedom because they've got... all of the people they're renting from have a say about whether they get their temple recommended.
Housing.
They get watched and reported
and
on,
all the other students are watching them, and so I felt like I had. And being a PhD student, it's mostly an undergraduate college, so they don't monitor you in the same way they do the younger kids. But it gave me a chance to make lots of friends, join a lot of groups, have a great social life, and at the same time, research about marriage and family and what is gay relationships like. And then I figured by the time I was done, I would have a decision. But I think the only other thing I wanted to add about that story where I kind of hit my low is that as I've thought back retrospectively, it's almost like I feel like if you're that far on the hook of Mormonism, that you almost have to die before you can be born again, before you can start asking questions that aren't really questions when you're a Mormon. You have it decided, you know the answer. And it's like I could begin to ask questions. I could begin to be open about information in a way that I wasn't up till then. And so I think I did have to go through that. I'm glad I didn't go any further down that path than I did. I'm sorry if people are there. I hope that they can find a way to use it that they realize that, I don't know, somehow it's like the phoenix, coming out of the ashes. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't consume you completely, there's a chance that you can be a beautiful thing. I think that Harry Potter, that beautiful bird, it's all colorful, and life has been that way since. It's just gotten better, but anyway.
Are you saying that sometimes when you feel like you don't want to live anymore, that almost death can lead to a rebirth if you don't actually die, and you kind of work your way through it and start listening to yourself and start following your heart and your soul and your kind of self-wisdom, instead of living someone else's external life for you, that if you follow that, reaching the point of almost wanting to die can almost be a death of self and then a rebirth into something very beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a strange metaphor, but I feel like I couldn't have done that without having died in my mind, or somehow I couldn't just switch. My worldview is so entrenched that I needed kind of a death experience before I was willing to try and explore. I remember thinking that thought about how I've never tried anything before. And I thought, well, I'm going to set it up so before I kill myself, I'm going to go up and I'm going to smoke a pack of cigarettes, and I'm going to have some alcohol, and I'm going to have some coffee, and I'm going to, maybe I'll have sex, and somehow I'll just have all those experiences, and then I'll finish it off. But then it's like, no, why would I even start on all those things after a lifetime of not doing it? It didn't make sense. And it's like a no-win situation. I couldn't move forward, and I couldn't stay where I was any longer.
The term that I use of what you're referencing, that I use a lot, is the death of belief. And so then you have to start over as to, well, what do you believe now? Where do you go from here?
Well, and it's a little more subtle in one way, in that the beliefs are all still there. I still wanted to go to BYU and figure this out. So I hadn't lost my beliefs. I just had suspended them, and I was willing to begin to kind of test them again, instead of, it's had this lifetime of you trusting that tingly as my, like you say, epistemology, the way I prove what is true. And now I'm going to start over and start reconsidering some of these things. So I didn't know what I didn't believe in. I didn't become a non-believer. I just became somebody that was open to information and to learning. And I was starting my PhD in marriage and family, so that was a perfect kind of place for me to. And then I thought, well, here's a safe place too, because I'm not gonna. They won't teach me things with an agenda to get me out of the church or to get me in the gay world. So it'll be a place where I can be safe and learning.
Yeah, it's so beautiful and such a powerful metaphor. And I'm just so, on the one hand, I'm so sad that both of you were pushed into lifestyles that were completely incongruous or incompatible with your core natures. And that, in your case, Ernie, you're involving another woman who's a victim too, and then all the disruption with the kids. But you're making all these huge life decisions, like you said, based on these beliefs that in some ways were probably good for you, but then in some ways were catastrophic. And I'm so sad that it led you there. And Gary, I'm so sad that, we studied the LGBTQ Mormon experience. Some Mormon men would go to 35 and 40 and 45 holding on to celibacy. And they would become, I hate to say this, shells of a man trying to live this gospel that was literally deadly. It was toxic. You talk about rat poison. It's like titrating a tiny bit of rat poison every day for 20 or 30 or 40 years. It seems like that's what it does to your soul. And I'll just say this, when I left Microsoft in 2004 and I attended my very first Sunstone in 2004, my friend Ron Scow had produced this little video about kind of the LGBT Mormon experience. And he produced this video, and I think it's the first video I ever put up on Mormon Stories YouTube page. If you scroll back to the very beginning of Mormon Stories, he was releasing it as a DVD. And I'm like, nobody's going to see this. And YouTube just kind of came out. And I'm like, why do we put this on YouTube? So I ripped it. I ripped the DVD to a MP4 and I uploaded it to YouTube. But I remember, I think you were both there at the Sunstone presentation, but I remember watching this video and I was struck, Ernie, I was struck by the story of you and your huge family and all your gay siblings. And I'm like, whoa, I thought you were Polynesian for some reason. And I'm like, whoa, this family is kind of crazy. What a weird experience. But then with you, Gary, I'm just like, I was watching that video and I'm just like, what a tragic, sad, talking about building your house and waiting and just waiting to live a happy life and becoming what I perceived as like a shell of a man. And I don't mean to put that on you, but when I was watching that in 2004 or 5, I was just like, this is horrible what we're doing to people.
Yeah.
And it was I didn't end up starting my PhD until 5 years later and doing my research until 6 years later. But it left you two left a really big impression on me, in addition to some other experiences I had had before.
Wow.
It's like, and Evergreen was still alive. And I'm just like, we got to do something about this, because either way, the church gave 3 options for LGBT people. And I've said this a lot. It's for men, it's marry a woman that you're not attracted to, disaster, become celibate and become a shell of a man, disaster, or die. Those are the 3 options you had as a gay Mormon, and to some extent to this day. And I'm thankful that you're willing to share your stories. And I'm so sad that not just the Mormon church, but Orthodox Judaism and evangelical Christianity and Catholicism and Islam and a million other religions have taught these toxic beliefs that have led millions of people into these tragic kind of situations.
Well, and I'm sorry if my video has told people that there's a way to do this, because in a way that's kind of the way we set it up, so that it would look like, you can be single in the church. But I think that at that time I was at BYU and I was studying marriage and family, but like I said, I had a more open mind, so it was only telling kind of half the story. There was a half of the story that was more open, I remember doing a paper I did a research project at BYU on gay Mormon studies. This was before your study, and we had about 165 people fill out the survey, and we later did a follow-up 7 years later. So I don't know, I think it's the only longitudinal study that's been done on this topic. But I thought, if I'm studying marriages, and maybe I should study the gay relationships too, and these men. So anyway, it was I guess I forgot what I was going to say about that. Anyway, it was It was
an eye opener. I knew Gary at that time, and similar to your findings, John, there was a parallel as to, okay, if you're going to remain and you're going to abide as opposed to, leave. It was a very similar parallel of findings of, well, these are the depressed.
I was going to say that I remember writing one paper where I talked about 6 types of people in the sample, and one of them was somebody that had decided to stay single and celibate in the church their whole life, and it was such a miserable scenario, and all of the groups got better the more accepting they were as you moved down the continuum. And I remember my brother, who had a gay son at the time, I don't mean his son is not gay now, he's also got 2 lesbian daughters now. Anyway, he's still very much an apologist for the church, and when I talk to him, he always wants to point out that 6th group that, here's somebody that's doing it, and it was totally the opposite of what I intended. I kind of wanted to it's like someone saying, well, I'm 99% sure, and the 1% is lying, or whatever. It's like, I guess that I said that wrong. Anyway, it was supposed to be like, here's the worst possible scenario that we wouldn't want for anybody, and yet because there is one possibility that exists out of this whole possibility. It doesn't matter how bad it is. If that's the one that fits with the gospel, that's the one that we should choose. And so he was very happy that there was one that he could own.
This brother just got called to be a stake president.
Anyway.
Well, I'll include a link in the show notes to this original video. I just found it on YouTube, and we'll include it.
You can see what we looked like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, at that time, you hadn't met yet. Is that right?
We were friends.
You weren't an item yet.
No. We were friends for 4 years before we were an item.
Yeah.
Since Gary lived in Salt Lake, and I was in a relationship then with Mark, gay Mormon father, we would visit our kids, but not necessarily at the same time. So we would stay at Gary's place.
Yeah.
Mark and Ernie would take turns coming up to see their kids, and Ernie's dad, and I would come down and visit them, and I remember Ernie came to Yellowstone for a conference where I was presenting, and we just toured through Yellowstone and drove back together, and so we had a really beautiful friendship. And Ernie would listen to me for hours on the phone or write long letters of all my theories and ideas, and we'd just be real buddies. It was fun.
So that was one of the ironies of these groups like Evergreen and even North Star and Affirmation, but particularly Evergreen. We would see participants in Evergreen say it was actually helpful to them. And I'm like, and then you've already referenced this. It's like, wait, how can a conversion therapy group that's primarily religious be helpful? But it was just a way to find friends, to not feel alone, to not feel broken, to not feel crazy.
That was so huge to me.
So even if the church was trying to change you and it was still religious, at least you weren't alone wanting to die, right?
Yeah. Well, that's got to be a huge part of that suicidal ideation is that you're alone. And to have that satisfied with friends, and some gay men as well as straight people don't believe that I can, but I would love to just sleep with somebody that would let me cuddle with them, another man. I know some of the reparative therapies decided to go in that direction and encourage that, because even without sex, being able to hold somebody, it's just huge. It just unleashes all this emotion and hormones that we have, and it's part of being human to be able to hold somebody and cuddle. That, to me, that was way more important than having sex at that stage of my life.
Yeah. So, Ernie, you talked about getting divorced and then dating and eventually finding Mark. How long was it before you kind of really questioned your Mormon faith and deconstructed it from the time of your divorce until kind of your deconstruction? How many years did you go still as a believer on some level?
That's a good question, because I think it's a gradual process. Some people, especially in our modern day and age, start having questions, listen to your Mormon stories, dive in, and within 3 months they're done. But we didn't have any access to such resources. So I remained a believer right into my relationship with Mark, but not necessarily like Mark did. Mark is a staunch believer, still believes now, and enjoys going to Mormon churches because he wants to help and mentor gay kids that might, fall in that area. But and that was too much eventually for me, because in the process of now being in a relationship and enjoying my life, and just gradually I just started to lose my belief. And when I met this guy, we sort of challenged each other. I mean, okay, on questions like, now that we will, in Gary's word, get rid of the tingly as a means of verifying truth, let's turn to the scientific method. Let's ask questions. And we kind of hopscotched because, and for us, we've become secular, but the issue, one issue was, well, what about, is there a God, and what is God, et cetera? And, Gary said, hey, that's a good one. But then one day I said, well, yeah, about the importance of the atonement. And he challenged me. And all of a sudden I thought, hey, wait a minute. And I really started digging down, and I realized I don't believe this anymore. It's not
what was wrong with the
necessary.
atonement?
They talk about atonement in the Mormon like it's a holy word, like there's some magic.
Without Christ, right, and without
Somehow
an atonement, we're all lost.
And you
so that
can't
there's
conceive
a God
it.
that has to intervene and make it possible. And this is, of course, the whole Mormon story, the whole the whole God story almost anywhere, is it's really important to align yourself with that. Well, I lost all of that. And I started reading books.
And that's an afterlife, is there an afterlife? These questions, I think a lot of people don't want to ask them because they like kind of believing, and they like staying in this kind of agnostic kind of believer position. But here I'm a PhD student, and I'm a first thinker, and so I'm always asking the next question, or Ernie is. So,
right. So I started reading Dawkins, and Hitchens.
Well, and I don't want to turn off I know a lot of Mormon stories are still believers of various sorts, but this is just our journey.
Yeah, that's your
Right.
story. Yeah, we're not evangelizing. We just want to hear your
Yeah,
Just hearing your
I'm
story,
not trying
yeah.
to say they're wrong or anything. This is just what we've come to.
So Ernie, you would have gone how many years between your divorce and kind of meeting Gary where you started to deconstruct? How many years would that have been?
Easily 8 years, maybe. But
So
I was never active, and Mark was active. He
Okay.
would attend every Sunday.
Oh,
He
okay.
sang in the choir, and the bishop finally interviewed him, wanted to interview him, and asked Mark,
Tell him about the shirt, the T-shirt.
well, that's where I'm going.
Oh, okay.
asked Mark, hey, where do you stand? And Mark said, I love the church. I love to sing. And the bishop said, well, hey, that's good enough for me. The bishop got a call 2 years later from Lawrence C. Down that says, I understand you have a Mr. So-and-so in your congregation and that he lives with a man. And the bishop responded, well, I have met with Mark and we haven't addressed this issue, but, I'm fine with him participating because he really contributes in the choir and all this stuff. But then he went to Mark and said, this may not end up well. And then he called Mark 2 weeks later. He said, Lawrence, he had his region assignment changed, so we don't have to worry about him anymore. 2 years later, Mark wore a shirt where Steve Benson, grandson of President Benson, very artistic, drew the shirt for the Affirmation conference, advertising it. On that shirt was Brigham Young standing like this with 27 women behind him, and there's 2 guys, cowboys, in front of him holding hands, and Brigham says, that's not normal.
Or not natural or something.
He went
I
into
want to see a photo of the shirt. I wonder if it's on the internet somewhere.
he went into
Probably.
the bank, and some lady saw that,
From his ward.
reported it to the stake president.
Highlighting that polygamy was a non-traditional family. But that's okay. But,
Yeah,
but
it's
gay couples
Yeah.
Yeah.
somehow unacceptable.
So he called Mark and he said, you know what? And the bishop said, Mark, I'm sorry, but they're going to have to hold a court with some of my procedural legal background. I said, well, I'll go there, Mark, and just be with you. We go meet the stake president, and he says, who are you? Well, I sleep with him. I didn't say that, but it's like, he said, wait
Mark,
a minute.
he's talking about Mark. Even though he
You're
pointed at
with
me.
Mark. Well, he said, and he was a really kind man, though he was. And he said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to call you in too. He says, but I see that you're a couple. I will call you in as a couple. And so we had a court.
Court of love.
A court of love. But because of where I was at that time, okay, I decided I knew what they had to do. They're guardians. They've got their appointed assignment. So rather than becoming combative, utilizing their language, which I'm very, the spirit and all of these things, I got their attention and shared with them the struggle of gay Mormons. And it did have quite an impact because at the end, the first counselor was kind of just looked like Packer and behaved like him. He got the heck out of there. And almost all the rest remained. Half of them were weeping. And the stake president said, this is really frustrating. You're the very kind of men that belong in stake presidencies and on high councils, but I have to do what I have to do. So that's where I lost my membership, and it wasn't a big deal to me. But Mark still kept going, even as an excommunicated member.
Wow. Around what year was that?
Well, let's see. That was about 96, 97 maybe.
Okay. Wow. And so you both were still believers at the time, and you were excommunicated from the Mormon Church as believers. And then Mark keeps attending after being excommunicated.
Right. And
That's
of course,
some
here's
that's some
what's really
resilient belief
interesting.
right there.
They
And
always
that's
say
not
this
so
in the
unusual, too.
excommunication process, apparently, like, well, if you want to come back and you can still pay your tithing. And I thought, oh, really? But because I still believed in the principle, for about a couple of years, I would save my tithing and then I would just randomly be kind to people. And I remember one time, and I don't know, it was very moving to me because of what happened. I saw this lady going through a dumpster, and next to her was apparently her daughter, only 3, just hopping, very happy, and something just melted to me, so I just reached in my sock. I was rollerblading and handed her might have easily been, I don't know, $500 or so, but I was like, this is how I'm going to use my tithing. So I kept those principles of, that I don't believe now, but I mean, you're right. See, it's a process. For me, it was a process of slowly, and after, meeting Gary, a lot started to change in terms of what
We're so intellectual in our conversations and topics and thoughts that we work through a lot of this and then kind of resolve and go forward.
Let me, before we get to that, and I want to, and Gary, maybe you can answer this first, and Ernie, you can add. How could I'm imagining people who are now LGBTQ affirming thinking, well, once you acknowledge you're gay and once you decide you're gonna date and have relationships with men, well, your beliefs got to disappear because you can't. Number one, you're taught it's a sin, and so it's too much cognitive dissonance. And so as soon as you kind of say, I'm going to accept who I am, like you said, you're going to choose life and love, Gary, over rat poison and death. Once you kind of make that choice, some people would go, well, of course you're going to, the way that you would manage your cognitive dissonance would be to just kill your belief. You just say, okay, this church is stupid. These beliefs are stupid. I tried their way. I was miserable. Only sadness came from it for me and the people around me. And now I'm getting the tinglies, living the good life. So clearly I was taught bad things. It's not true. And therefore, bye-bye all my Mormon beliefs. Can you explain to us first Gary, and then Ernie, why that's not an immediate process and conclusion?
Yeah. I guess, we construct a world that's part of being human, and that world is how we judge things. And just because one thing in that world has changed doesn't mean that everything else has changed too. We have to test everything else and see. Eventually, I've kind of reconstructed a new world where I see the world in a different way, and we can talk about that later. I think it's really fascinating how
we'll get there, but I want to know how you maintain belief. How do you maintain Mormon belief as an authentically gay man?
For me, it was kind of like I said to Ernie just a few minutes ago, that I just suspended what I knew. I didn't know if I knew it or not anymore. I just, we're so confident that we know everything, and I still believed things. I still believed in the tinglies because the tinglies were telling me my relationship with these gay men was true and honest, and so I hadn't lost yet my belief in the tinglies, and the tinglies taught me about all of the testimony of all the prophets and taught me the testimony of all the scriptures and all these things. I had separate testimonies of at points where I felt that feeling when I was contemplating it. So I guess there's a dissonance now, because now that I got the confirmation of my relationship, which doesn't match with the way the church teaches and the church leaders teach. I think, and this is interesting too, because I think in Mormonism, we're taught as priesthood holders that we have to make choices. We have to be the ones to interpret the rules, where I think the women and a lot of even other men, a lot of them are taught to accept what their leaders tell them. And the leaders are the ones that define. And if the leader knows better than me, then I have to default with the leader. I see this in some of my siblings. My sister says she doesn't trust herself, and that's why she can't be around me with her kids, because she doesn't even trust herself, let alone trust me. But as a young man growing up in Mormonism, we're taught to trust our feelings, and we're taught to give inspiration. I'm supposed to give a blessing, and somebody's waiting for some prophetic thing to come out of that blessing. I have to be the voice of God to tell them whatever. And so they kind of teach you how to kind of be self-determining. And so, no, I kind of had a little ambiguity there, as I knew the church didn't accept this, but I knew the church was true, and I knew this was true. And so I had to go through a process of deconstruction where I kind of left all my beliefs in place, but then slowly took them down one at a time and said, okay, do I still believe in this one? Is, the law, the word of wisdom, it's supposed to give you a good life. Does it hold up? Do I believe in those things, or is it a different set of things that would be my word of wisdom? And so I think it's taken all these years to kind of little by little reconstruct a world that I believe in, that fits my experience and my knowledge. And I continue to read authorities. I read the science. I read what people say in politics. I like to hear both sides. I like to understand. But I'm going to continue to create my world, but it's just more in sync now, I think, with these areas that were out of sync before.
You understand my question about why it's not immediate?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I still have to operate as a human, and we have to have a world, and it's just like the world is still the same world. I kind of am shocked when my stake president brother comes up to me and starts explaining something as if I'm in primary and haven't heard it before. As Mormons, we believe, he doesn't say Mormons. That is, I just did a no-no.
Latter-day Saints.
I'm sorry.
As Latter-day Saints.
Church of Jesus Christ, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I just say his church now. As a member at your church. In our church, we believe that the prophets get revelation. And I'm like, why is he talking to me like that? I grew up in it. I know it. I haven't forgotten everything. It's like they think somehow that you made this choice and now you're a different person and you no longer understand their language. It's like we still speak the language. We just have shifted. Anyway, I'm sorry I didn't get your question. Maybe Ernie did better.
I mean, one way I've heard it described is it doesn't wash off. Mormonism doesn't wash off.
It's a culture, and a culture is part of our identity. And, and this is where our culture gets smaller as we move from Mormon to ex-Mormon or post-Mormon, whatever you want to call it. There's fewer people that can relate to my world than used to. I've got coworkers. One is from Florida. He's Cajun. I'm not Cajun. He's Creole, from a Creole community. And I've got a boss who's Jewish. And, I don't relate to their worlds. I wouldn't fit in her synagogue. And where do I go now to find a place where people relate to me, where I have the same lingo and see the same world? Well, it's the ex-Mormons or the post-Mormons, people that have been through similar things. But, we still have that Mormon part of us. It's still there. That's where I started from. That's how I experienced the world my first 30 years.
The wiring's thick. The grooves in the brain run deep, and they don't wash off just when you start living authentically. Ernie, what would be your answer to that same question of why?
You're not going to get, this is my answer. I don't think you're going to get a common answer, and I'll tell you why I think, my opinion. You're talking about identity, and it's a process. And so if we look at anybody's identity, right, we like to think of ourselves as a self. The fact is, research has shown that your identity and the nature of yourself is usually composed of others and the culture you're in. And so if you've been in this, steeped for 20, 30 years, I don't think you can get out of it overnight. Some do. A lot of them do. I say there's a lot more resources available so that we can go at warp speed. I think that actually makes a difference too. If I had access to what's now available on Mormon stories, I'm telling you, I would have gone at lightning speed, but there was nothing there. And so you're on your own, and that, I think, accounts to why wouldn't they just logically drop it if it isn't working, go on? Well, it's like, how do you shed an identity overnight if it's so embedded?
With your friends and with your family and with your work and with your entire culture, your sense of spirituality, everything.
Well, look at my ex, Mark. He's still a believer.
Yeah.
Astoundingly.
Decades later, right? Yeah. That's amazing.
I think, too, one thing that's interesting when it comes to deconstruction is this idea of, for many people, beliefs. There's there's an expectation when you kind of, deconstruct belief. That can happen at all sorts of paces, right? But like the emotional component, that goes on for years and years and years. It's completely a normal process to realize I actually don't believe that thing anymore. But you have an emotional still, you're still emotionally processing it as if you did. And that can be really confusing. An example is to feel guilt over drinking wine when you know. And that's the conditioning part. And that I find is that takes practicing over years and years and years to kind of, and so just wanted to make that observation that it's really difficult. I think there's this expectation a lot of times where people are like, well, I believe differently now, so it's all going to sync up. And now I'm going to just feel free, and from here forward, it's going to be, but that emotional side, that emotional memory is stored in a different place in the brain. We experience it in a very different way. So it's really pesty. It comes up even when we are way beyond believing.
Yep.
Thank you. I agree.
I've never been gay, but Margie and I stayed in the church like another 13 years after we completely lost our faith. And I wore my garments for a long, long time after I didn't believe that they had any special powers or really meant anything, just because I had gotten really comfortable wearing them, and it was hard to stop wearing them,
Interesting.
Like, anyway, I have never been gay, so I'm not trying to compare my experience to yours, but in many ways, I think we can probably all relate on some level, but I'm glad we're talking about it. Thanks for talking about that. That was beautiful, Ernie and Gary and Margie. Okay, let's talk about your love story. So, so we know you had a relationship before Ernie with Mark and others. Gary, you were able to date some too. Let's talk about the first time you started thinking, and we know you had a friendship for a few years before, sparks started to fly, but let's talk about the emergence of your love story. Where does your falling in love begin?
Maybe I should preface this by saying that when I first met Gary, I was instantly impressed. I was still with Mark, and I even had the thought to myself, if maybe through death or otherwise I lost Mark, I couldn't conceive of Gary being primary relationship in my life. He's too cute, he's too smart, and he's too young. So inevitably, by really accepting that, we had the deepest, still do, but richest friendship where we could share anything. We could travel together. We didn't need worry. We were about, overstanding boundaries that we'd set for ourselves. So it was beautiful in that way. Let me just say very quickly in summation, I ended it with Mark because he still believed and I lost my belief. 5 years after we separated, he finally said to me, you were right. It's incompatible. But for a long time, he just felt like, whoa, why did you stop this? We can make it work. But it wouldn't work. So that's the first part, right?
That's helpful.
So then we have a Gamma Phi, Gay Mormon Fathers National Conference, first time ever, right? In Washington. Mark and I are there, and in the same unit, Gary and his friend from Ecuador staying.
Dormitory where they have, 16 bedrooms on each floor, and they got a kitchen. Right. And so Ernie and Mark are sitting in the kitchen, kind of the center of this social world. Keep going.
Yeah, and then I see Gary, who's in the choir. I come down the
stairs. We've dropped our bags, me and
he's walking to his rehearsal.
Friend.
I chase him down, and I say, hey, Gary. And I did, though. I have this kind of strange habit, but I said to him, we're going to be friends.
And I laughed at it. I said, "Oh, right, yeah. You guys live in California, and I live in Utah, and we're out here in Washington at this retreat, and it would be really nice. I'd love that because you guys are so awesome, but probably not."
And we did develop a friendship, but as soon as I had ended it with Mark and moved from California to Salt Lake, and we were in an apartment, and Mark moved out.
Around what year is this?
So I usually go by graduating from BYU in 2005, and then my grant at USC started 2006. So,
we're talking 2005.
January
So
2006.
this is around a year after I learned about you two.
That's right.
After, I moved to Utah 2004, start Mormon Stories in 2005, and saw your video, and you had not yet started dating, but
we were
soon
friends,
after
right?
there,
you
started dating around 2005.
So here we come back to Salt Lake.
Your love story and Mormon stories share the same anniversary year.
We've
How's
just
that?
been going. We've been on this journey, and your research study after mine, and
That's awesome. Okay, so we're at 2005.
Well, and I've always been, I recognize, not necessarily a compliment to me, a relationship person. I have not been single very long in my entire life. And so I break up with Mark thinking I'm single now. And my daughter likes to say, Dad, Gary's not stupid. He's not going to wait for a line to form. He's going to just say, hey.
well, and like I said, I kind of have, I guess sexual orientation is sometimes includes more than just gender, and Ernie matched so many things. One is there's not a lot of non-Caucasians living in Utah, but you find a few Hispanic and Black and different things. So Ernie's in that category that I would first eliminate and kind of see who's in this category, and then here we've been kind of best buddies for 4 years, so we're compatible. We can travel together. It was kind of a no-brainer to me that here's, even though there's an age difference, I wouldn't have necessarily sought him out at the beginning, but after 4 years of being friends, I just knew that he was closer to all the things I liked than anyone else I'd seen. And so it was a no-brainer that once he's available, I was right there.
And in less than a month, Gary moved in.
I'm not going to correct you. It was probably a lot less than a month. Yeah.
Maybe even. Okay, I have a question for you. Kind of thinking back to your getting to know one another, are there certain attractions that you remember feeling for each other? So, oftentimes we talk a lot about sexual attraction, but what about for you two in particular, this idea of emotional attraction or intellectual? I'm hearing in your description some of that, but I'm curious if you both feel that, you felt that, or aesthetic attraction, anything within the ways of what you remember experiencing as you were getting to know each other.
I'm glad you asked that, because I've always been just, how do I put this? A sucker for intelligence. I love intelligence, and this guy is really bright. And when he exposed me to stuff he's reading and writing, I think he was impressed with my response. I would say, what about this? What about that? And to this day, when we have to go on a trip or we're in the car for 4 or 5 hours, we get excited. Why? Because we have all that time to talk and share ideas.
Or listen to a podcast or read a book and talk about it.
Right. And no detriment to Mark. We're all different, but he might have, read 3 or 4 books in the 13 years we're together. And I usually read 3 books a month or more, usually. And here I find Gary challenging me. So that has been a huge, and continues to be a huge connector, is our shared interest. And so what happened is right after we started getting together and we came back from California, Gary doing research, and this relates to your issue of belief. We dropped Mormonism and we started looking at other things.
Okay, wait, you just dropped it? So you had a period of mutual deconstruction first, is that right?
Well, while I was at BYU, I was, that was part of my journey. But when we moved in together, we started my grant at USC. We were in Long Beach, and I would attend a gay church there, gay-friendly kind of rock band group. They were born again, gay and lesbian people there.
It was interesting.
And Ernie wasn't so interested in that, but when we came back to Utah 3 years later, we went to a spiritual living center, and we went to the church that you helped support, Oasis. And we've gone to there was another one, Unitarian Church, I think, for a while. So we were trying different things and see what works. What do we resonate with?
Do you, each of you want to just say, if you when you deconstructed Mormonism, and I want to get right back to where you were going, Ernie, but I don't want to skip over this. Each of you just spend a minute or two when you deconstructed Mormonism finally intellectually. What were the main things that sort of made you conclude that it wasn't what you thought from an intellectual standpoint? Do you want to go first, Ernie?
Well, first of all, I reached a point where I didn't believe anything as far as Mormonism goes. But then that made me question, well, what about God? What about Christ? And as we started addressing those and I started reading books, I just lost it all.
Well, were there things about Mormonism that you concluded weren't true that you thought were true? Did you
almost
study?
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe just list the top 5, just so that
let's
people
start
get a
with the
sense.
founder, Joseph Smith, sending men on missions while he is having relationship with their wives, multiple first visions. How do you account for that? I mean, anybody in this world, I would think, could say if they saw God, they would have a pretty accurate memory of the details. So, hey, what's wrong? What's going on here? So that's first of all. And then all of the truth claims, the only true church on the face of the earth. And then even logically, if this is so, they're doing a terrible job of converting the earth. They're not even keeping up the population of the earth in terms of the percentage that they are. I mean, these beliefs that the stone is going to fill the whole earth.
The prophecy of Daniel.
It's not holding up.
Yeah.
It's not holding up at all. I mean, the more I look into it, now I'm so far away that I'm gone from, at first, I didn't like being around Mormons because it's like having smoked and you quit and then you're around smokers. And it was really irritating. But now I've reached a point of everybody gets to choose their own way and it's humorous. Why is it humorous? Because, these stories are way beyond Santa Claus. In terms of, believing in creation of worlds and God and
just the mythology.
The whole mythology
of Mormonism.
But then you go beyond that and start asking about the mythology of other beliefs. And I think, maybe you've noticed, I think a lot of ex-Mormons lose all beliefs, but a lot of them find other beliefs. And I think that's wonderful. I don't want to advocate secularism, but what I want to advocate is freedom of choice, self-determination.
Margie's nodding.
Love it.
Okay, so for you, Ernie, you mentioned first vision, multiple accounts of first vision, polygamy, the idea of a one true church, but not really keeping up with the growing Earth's population. Those are some of the things you mentioned.
Well, and now add to that, in the last few years, what we've seen coming out of the church, why are you still tithing people if you're sitting on a pile of money, if I may say so? And then all of the things we're learning now just quite recently of the great lengths they go that the image of the church takes precedence over innocent children being abused. Yeah. That really sets me off, by the way, because I think that's wrong. But then I also think, well, wait a minute, they're not alone. They're like other churches. I think Mormons like to think they're separate. We don't do that. But I'd say, no, you've got your own stuff going on.
Other churches, yeah. Okay, so those are some of Ernie's. Gary, any other issues you want to add that were part of your deconstruction of Mormonism specifically? And then we can go to Jesus and God and the other things.
Yeah, I think I had to kind of work through the epistemology thing first, where I had to...
The tingly problem.
The tingly problem. Because now I knew that God was not a homophobe, like some of the leaders kind of projected that. And so either I'm wrong or the church is wrong, the leaders. And a lot of the gay groups believe the church is wrong and they still waiting for that revelation or whatever. But to me, it's like, well, I have that same tingly. I know that God was not. He helped me on this journey, and this was not a bad fruit that came out of this experimentation. It was a good fruit, and God loved it. And so, how do I resolve this problem of knowing something that goes against everything else? And to me, it was the tingly that was the problem, because
the belief that feelings were an indication of knowledge or truth.
Right. My testimony that is now, I can now accept that that's as true as this table is hard sitting in front of me. I basically had a literal belief in one-to-one reality on things that we can't know, that we can believe in, but we can't know. And so once I kind of resolved that, then it put everything in question. And then we've basically gone down this rabbit hole. And I love Jeremy Reynolds, how well he summarized so many of these things in just a very simple book.
In the CES letter to a CES director, I'll include a link to the
Okay.
to that,
I thought he summarized it really well. I remember my brother asked me if there's one thing that would be a problem, what do you think it would be? And I was thinking through all the things Ernie said. I thought maybe the DNA, because that's definitely hard science. You can't work yourself around that.
Tell people what you mean by DNA.
The native Indians are supposed to be from a tribe of Israel, according to the Book of Mormon, which is the centerpiece of the church. Joseph Smith's authority comes from the Book of Mormon. So basically, it's all falling apart if that DNA evidence doesn't work. But
in your line of work, DNA is real.
And I love DNA, yeah. And I see, I'm solving all kinds of problems with DNA.
These days, people are discovering that they have siblings they didn't know about, that their parents had relationships with people and real siblings. DNA's real. It's a real thing. My
siblings follow the Meldrum, is that his name?
Rod Meldrum, yeah.
Yeah, his kind of line of thinking and his apologetics. And so they're all, well, you don't know, you're not an expert. Well, neither is he. He's not any more expert than I am. At least I work with DNA. But anyway, we've kind of done that. I think the most important ones for us were God and the afterlife, because...
so that's when Mormonism, you can put Mormonism aside, but you still have to...
So we'd never stop. Yeah, we keep going.
You kept going. You guys kept going.
And part of that journey, I might add, is we have a good friend who was teaching ancient scripture at BYU. We're talking 13 years ago. And then he lost his testimony, and he started a meetup group, amateur philosophy group. And Gary discovered it, and we joined. It's been going 12 years now. We almost meet every Sunday, and we've cover all kinds of topics, but that certainly not only helped in deconstructing, but in rebuilding what is our values, what is our ethics, what do we believe, what do we think is important.
Why, we have a lot of listeners that still believe in God and Jesus, and they are sad that so many ex-Mormons end up atheist or agnostic, and I would say it's over half. Why would you want to deconstruct God and Jesus? Why would you want to go to a philosophy class that would lead to, like many believers would say, man, belief in Jesus, what's wrong with that? That's just beauty and goodness and kindness and charity. Why would you ever want to lose your faith in Jesus? And then God, if you lose your faith in God in the afterlife, then all of a sudden you don't have the reassurance of a heaven. You don't have a loving Heavenly Father that's watching over you and inspiring you. Like, on behalf of my believing viewers and listeners, I'm going to just ask you, why would you even allow yourselves to go to that philosophy class if it would start challenging these beliefs that so many find beautiful and sacred?
So you just set the grounds of why I wouldn't want to take another person's beliefs away, particularly if it provides everything you mentioned. I feel like if we were to sum up, which is hard to do, what is the whole purpose of philosophy? What is the ultimate question in philosophy? It'll probably is, what is going on? What is reality? And even then, there's a lot of questions. What I love about the scientific method is that it's willing to challenge what we believe now is accurate. And so going on our side of the equation, in going to this philosophy group, we have delved into questions that have been asked over thousands of years. And, in the Book of Mormon, it says, everything, the philosophies of men
mingled with Scripture.
Right. They put it down as long, the philosophy.
Woe unto those that hearken unto, that believe they're wise. When they are learned, I'm a little rusty in my Book of Mormon. When they are learned, they think they are wise. For they hearken not unto the counsels of the Spirit or something like that.
Yeah, it basically denigrates the philosophies of men. But
Yeah.
the fact is, if anybody here is familiar and study philosophy, they ask fundamental questions on what does it mean to be good? What is ethical? All right? What is rationality and how should it be utilized? And so gaining out of that, we found not only our values, but a replacement belief in existentialism. That is, we are defined by our choices and are responsible for who we are by the choices and the actions we take. And for me, Stoicism. And I think Stoicism gets a bad rap. Everybody thinks that, well, that's being kind of,
Unfeeling,
apathetic, but that is not accurate. I'll just say 3 things about Stoicism that really served me in terms of, okay, where do you go if you let go of God? The first is, for me, death. And they really study that a lot. And you say, what do you mean by that? I think Gary and I hold our death close to us in our minds, not as a morbid type of thing, but as a realization that all of us will eventually die, and so we should make the most of the life we have. The second is the assertion that the most precious asset you have among all those that you have is time. And so you should be careful how you use it and apply it and focus with your time. Many times we're hold our money and our valuables, but with our time we just throw anywhere. And the third is more personal to me. It's the title of a chapter in a book called The Practicing Stoic, but it's what others think. And I think through culture, through church, through family, it's important to first guide people to think about what others think, but it can become a prison.
I think
and that's what happened kind of in my life. I was always helping other people, but neglecting myself because I'm worried about how, whether it's family or employer or who else. And one of the things that set it off with Gary right from the get-go for me, Mark was really troubled because towards the end of our relationship, I started going through therapy. What does Ernie want? What does Ernie believe? And he took it as a threat. And when I met Gary, or we started our relationship, he said, hey, I have a favor to ask you. I don't want you to stop your journey of self-discovery. And that was huge.
Wait, Gary said that to you, Ernie?
Oh, yeah, he said that to me right at the get-go, at the beginning. So I'm like, hey, this guy's a keeper.
I might regret it now.
That's right.
I wanted to answer that too, if I could.
Yeah, please.
When I remember, I have a memory, Orem Library, they have some rooms downstairs you can rent. And for family home evening one time, we rented a room and watched a movie, and it was called Yentl and Barbara Streisand. And I must have been about 12 years old, and I just loved that movie so much. I came out of there wanting to just fly off on a cloud or something. She was on the front of that ship headed to a place where she could be free and learn. And she had been from this conservative Jewish community where only the boys could learn. And she had gone through all these troubles to try to learn in spite of her culture. And here she was free she was going to be herself now. And I just felt, I think my dad had misgivings about whether he should have watched that show or not, but it captured something that was core to who I am and was at that time. And that is, I love learning. And to me, the greatest joy is to learn. And I could so relate to her not being able to learn. She sees out of a sliver of the window, and now the whole window is open, and there's a whole sky out there, and there's a whole ocean. There's so much to discover. And I think I realize not
touching you, that's all.
Not everyone has that motivation, and some people want to feel comfortable and enjoy being reassured. And, there's different things, but I think part of the answer for me is that at my core, I love learning, and I love learning things that are more and more real and more accurate and more. So I think Ernie is very pragmatic. he's had a hard life. He grew up in a poor family, and he had to support a family already while he was in college, and I had a lot more freedom. And so for me, the questions I ask after Mormonism is, okay, if I didn't have, did I have a pre-life? Do I have an afterlife? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? How do we become happy? How do we live the best life? What is a spirit? What is a soul? I want to know, what is it that this intellectual cognitive part of our brain is? Is it different from our bodies? Is it an extension of our bodies? Is it just something that has evolved and so I have all these questions that I ask that go beyond just a simple answer. And I really want to know. It's not like I'm afraid if I find the answer to that, my whole world might fall over and I have no reason to live. I have reason to live. I love life. I love Ernie. We're going to get into that, I think, is the final chapter here.
Almost there.
But I really love when I can change my view and understand I'm just starting to read a book called Philosophy in the Flesh, which emphasizes how cognitive science has discovered that our cognitive apparatus, that thinking we think is our soul or our spirit doing all that intellectualizing that's separate from our experience, from our body and our senses, is actually an extension, a metaphorical extension of our senses. And it totally makes sense. And we're doing it all the time. And existentialism takes apart, how can we be a single thing? What is it to be, the fish is in the water bowl. What is it like to be a fish? Well, you can't tell because that's all the fish knows. And if we do that to ourselves, what is it to be a human? That's what existentialism is about, is answering that question. And when you read through all this kind of complex, head-heavy stuff, you start to realize that you don't need a body-mind separation in order to explain humans. It's all there. And so it's just, I love learning. And when DNA came into genealogy, I loved that. It's so fun. But I'm not afraid to learn. And I've always loved college. And the more college, I wasn't married, so I had an ability to get my master's degree. And then later went back and took advantage of this situation to get a PhD. I just loved learning, and I think for me that's why it's not that I'm afraid or that religious people aren't good people. I think they are good, but like Ernie said, the last part of that answer is that we've discovered that the answers we find have just as much values, orientation, and reason for living life. They switch things around. So, some of my siblings were kind of hoping Mom would die early, so she said, it's hard to see her suffer, but it's really about them. It's not about her. And for me, I want to watch how she goes through this so I can figure this out, and I want to be there, and I want to see what she has to live for at each stage of that process as she was dying. And so I had a motivation to be there with her right to the end, and Mom thought her daughters would be the ones to take care of her, but they couldn't handle her. They couldn't be around her.
I might add to that this was an irony, at least for me, that the believers in the family, and it was the non-believers in the family, Gary and his brother, his mom would stay 3 days with us, 4 days with that family. And this went on for a long time as she was diminishing. Eventually, we even moved to bed into George's home. And then the last 2 weeks, Gary was able to be with her. But what puzzled me was, it seems to me that because their beliefs were so strong, they actually kind of were waiting for her to pass so that she could be happy. And yet they're losing this opportunity to be with her while she's alive.
So there's this different set of values, but they're every bit as valuable and something that are dear and to hold to and to live for as anything you get in a religious value system.
So beautiful.
Anyway.
Beautiful. Well, yeah.
Carried away on that one.
I loved it. I loved it, Gary.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And for our believing audience, I don't want people to think that what we're saying is that if you are a believer, you're not good around people's death, because clearly it's going to be a distribution. There's going to be
We're all
secular people
different.
that don't deal with death too. And but you dealt with the question I was going to ask, which is, some people would say that takes all the joy and meaning and fulfillment and happiness out of life to lose a belief in God or Jesus or the afterlife. And your witness is that for you, it's actually increased your joy and happiness, but that may not be, you're not preaching that as the truth for everyone either, right?
Because I now find what you just said is what a believer might state as astounding, that they would think that there could be no joy or happiness, or that I would be deprived of fulfillment and meaning and purpose by losing the belief in God or afterlife, when actually it's, for me personally, it is reversed. It's enhanced life considerably. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily easier. Sometimes I can almost have an envy for those who comfortably accept, the challenges of life or loss of life, because it's going to go on. And that sometimes I think may rob people of real grief, from my viewpoint, because I feel that the loss is permanent. And so I find myself grieving in ways that I never would have when I was a believer, because I was so assured everything's going to be fine and we're going to be together again, etc.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks. Okay, well, let's switch to the final chapters, you say, which is your love. Now, I'm going to tee this up, and that's that both of you went many, many decades not knowing the love of your life. And then you appear to have found it. And I read in one of the parts of your outline that you don't want to put yourselves on a pedestal, because no one's perfect, and there are always issues, and maybe we've wanted to move away a bit from like role models or prophets or but at the same time, I think any of us that have witnessed your relationship have been inspired by your love and your joy with each other. And so maybe each of you take a stab at what it was like to find true love or find meaningful love, and how you, in some ways, you're trying to make up for lost time, but also just enjoy each other now that you've found each other. Who wants to go first?
You're going to let me go first. Oh my. Yeah, I have a long list of the highlights of our time together that I was thinking of, but I'd have to sit and read through it because we've had so many. And I think it's been a progression for us. So we were best friends already at the beginning. And I think as time has passed, we've gotten closer and closer. We're relaxing and becoming a couple more. I was an individual up until my mid-30s, 36 or I don't know. So I wasn't initially ready to be a we completely. So that's part of the reason why I encouraged him to continue being himself, because but over the years since then, it's hard for me to, we think about what's life, who's going to die first, and, what's life going to be like as we approach the end of life. And it's really hard for me to sometimes think of our life without Ernie. It certainly wouldn't be the same as it is now. And we've done so many things together. We made a trip to the west coast of Norway. When I was in Norway, people would talk about Hurtigrute, which is a shuttle that goes along the west coast of Norway from the border to Russia down to Bergen in the south. And that was a dream trip for me. And then earlier this year, we went and did the Danube River, which switches to the Main River and down up to the Rhine River, eventually coming out at Amsterdam from Budapest. And we just danced all our way up through the Central Europe on the top of that boat and watching the castles going by. And it was such a bonding time to have almost 3 weeks together there. And next year we're planning to go to Indonesia to see where Ernie's parents are from. And I know when we first talked at the ex-Mormon thing, we had said, well, we need to do 3 kisses for every kiss so that we can kind of make up for lost time. And I don't know, we're just, one thing I was thinking about is I'd often thought about, it's been hard for me to let go of my brother. And, he and I were so close in high school and all. And I thought, why am I thinking that way? I've got such a much even better companion now that's so much more fun. And we share even more than we did before. And now I just rambling because I can't remember your original question.
Yeah, well, Ernie, let's give you a chance to go, and then I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
So state your question again, and I'll...
Yeah, so, well, I'll say it this way. One of the things I learned early on as I was getting to know some LGBTQ individuals was that the term the gay lifestyle is actually an offensive term because it insinuates that your love is somehow like fundamentally structurally different than our love. So what is your love lifestyle? I'll ask it that way. What is your love lifestyle now that you have each other?
The way I approach this,
aside from cruises,
stepping back a bit, I would say what really makes it work for us is respect, a willingness to compromise, and for me personally, care. Now, I use that term because when we were taking care of Gary's mom, that is caring in action. And since I have met Gary, we're fundamentally different in some ways. He's introvert, I'm slightly extrovert. And so we learn from each other. But what has happened to me, in my perspective, ever since I've met Gary is he's changed. How has he changed? In the most important way. He seems to be more caring the longer we're together that, I just feel like I'm spoiled as hell sometimes because he's so concerned about my needs, my desires, what works for Ernie, that I'm just baffled that somebody could be so kind and good to me. But we have a great amount of respect. And if there is conflict, we generally want to understand and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And you are probably familiar with studies that shown that, if there's a 5-to-1 ratio, that's going to become a successful marriage.
Of what to what?
Yeah.
So
positives to negatives, right?
5-to-1 ratio, positive to negative.
And if there's a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1, they will tell you, I forget the guy's, expert's
John
name.
Gottman.
He will tell you that's a relationship headed for disaster. Really reluctant to say this, but I think we're definitely over the range of 10-to-1, more be like 14-to-1. And yet when that one happens, it can be really just as penetrating as anything. And so we apparently have developed in time how we overcome that. And instead of 3 days or a week, I know some people will keep grudges for years. We tend to resolve those issues very quickly, but in a very gentle and respectful and kind way to the other. I mean, that's one of the characteristics of this guy. He's not one to shout or scream or get angry. He's just very gentle. And we've learned how we operate, that one of us may need a little bit more time. But it's actually a beautiful thing because we find ourselves overcoming difficulties so quickly.
I think if I do something that hurts Ernie, then I'm hurting myself. And I guess this is where we become entangled a little bit as a couple. But I said to him, I needed maybe 3 days before to figure out what I'd done wrong because it's a blind spot. But I can't handle more than 3 hours now. We've got to talk about this, or, this hurts me to see you hurt, and it's my fault. And, so I think... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I should share this. And after saying that, you share it, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. But because we have no gospel story, right, we both enjoy sci-fi. And so we make up our own stories now. And so part of that is, I have a suspicion that I might be a time traveler. And the price you pay for that is you lose memory. So I don't know where the heck I'm from, but I know I'm in the human future. And that I've got some Romulan background, and I was supposed to find and hunt and bring back these ideal humans, except when I found them, I ran off with them. And so the continuation of that is, with a memory loss, and maybe it's a practice for dementia, I keep meeting Gary again and again. And so if we go to a bar to a party, I cruise him, but I try to be careful because you don't want to be too aggressive and scare somebody like him away.
Sometimes we get separated and then we see each other across the room and we just like pretend like we're meeting for the first time and have so much fun with that and get to know them. So where are you from? And, where are you staying tonight? You need a place and you can come home. Anyway, we just, a relationship can be new all the time. And I think, studying relationships at BYU and the literature on relationships, communication is always one of the biggest variables for all relationships. And a second one is having commonalities. The more commonalities, the better. We sometimes are attracted to opposites and we think that that's important, but it's really superficial. It's the commonalities that create good relationships. And I think this 5-to-1 as a minimum is important to understand as a ratio of positive to negative. And, I've read lots of gay, lesbian, heterosexual studies where they compare them, and the variables are the same, and the relationships work the same, and they're the old studies from the 50s were problematic, and the people that are anti-gay like to go back to those and say, well, they're promiscuous and they don't last long. The studies that have been done in the last 20 years are showing that these relationships, they're about two people and they're the same issues. And one of the differences that did come up when they studied these relationships was that there was more equality in gay and lesbian relationships than in hetero relationships. So, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing, and I think maybe we can understand what women deal with when men just take for granted things and sometimes interrupt the woman and doesn't listen very good to what she's saying because they're waiting for the next chance to say something. And, we don't realize this because we have a blind spot. We don't know what we don't know. But how do you figure that out? Well, when you're in a same-sex relationship, they're going to let you know they don't like it. This
brings up a good point, though, as to cultural roles, a wife and a husband. And so when you have two men, you actually have this freedom to navigate and say, well, who shall be responsible for what? But I think this also parallels and should parallel couples who leave the church. Simone de Beauvoir is a great philosopher, and she wrote a book in the 40s called The Second Sex, and it was autobiographical. But what she pointed out is, she said, I am a woman, and womanhood for centuries have been defined by men, and that it was time for women to identify themselves. So I've talked to a lot of friends and women that have left the church, and it's been a wonderful journey now of them deciding for themselves, who am I, what is my identity, what should be my role, along with their husband. And I think it's important for the men to hear that, to give them that opportunity, because often in ignorance, they don't know that they are falling into this role of, well, I know better and you should be doing this. And I'd say challenge that, stand up to that, because that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Margie's nodding.
Yeah. I just think there's so much that we can observe and cherish, I think, in the relationships of LGBTQIA, relationships that would be so helpful to kind of the hetero experience of, there's just so much, I think, that we could learn from and really. So anyway, loving
like
all that you're sharing. Because this power exploration as part of a faith transition within relationship is so common, and it's so fraught. It is a tough one for a lot of relationships. That renegotiating, trying to feel seen, in a way, and honestly, trying to create something new that hasn't existed in a relationship.
I hope this is salient to the conversation, but what do you do after you lose your belief? And I think you and I have talked about this before, John, just informally, where we realized that probably the biggest or number one challenge often for people who lose their faith and move on is a loss of community. And this is one of the remarkable things, I think, about our personal lives. When we were in California, for some reason, 95% of everybody we knew were a gay community. And right now, I'd say easily 99% of our community are, we use the term family, a family of choice, friends, is all coming out of the ex-Mormon community. You have actually interviewed or known a lot of these people, and they're like family to us. Yeah. And I'm making no exaggeration. In less than a year since you know, Faith Erickson, her children and us have kind of adopted each other. So now we have 6 grandchildren instead of 3. But it is that powerful of a bond that these people, it seems we have moved at warp speed because that community is so important, and all the love and support and authenticity that we receive from our friends. And many of these.
They have the Bakavoys and the Hackings and the booths. And, they were kind of our pods during COVID. And I think that one of the reasons why they're attracted to us is that most of them have gay children. And so they're like, wow, we don't even know gay couples. Who would be a gay couple? So when they see us, they are curious and very warm and friendly, but we've gotten to know them, and they love getting, they love being a part of our world, and we love them too. And it's just been very healing, I think, because of the AIDS epidemic. Our generation of gay people is much reduced compared to what it would have been, and there's a lot fewer people that are out, healthy, happy relationships, and so it's kind of we found. And I think because of the, what do we call it, hypermasculinity in our society, it's always been a fearful thing to be around heterosexuals if you're a gay person coming out. And you feel like, first you're excited, you've got this community of people to be with, and then you cling to it like this is the only people I can be safe with. And that's the way it's been. That's the way it was when we were in California. That's the way it was when I grew up in Utah. And when I came out first in Utah, all of my friends were gay except for the people at school or work. And now it's just been so amazing with the gay marriage and all the movies and shows that now show gay characters. It's become kind of tabooed or whatever. It's gotten to where people are not
destigmatized a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
And we've gotten to where we can feel free to dance on the Danube with a bunch of people we've never met before and not be afraid that somebody's going to come up and smack us in the face. That's what might have happened to Utah back in the 70s or 80s. And, all those gay bashing kinds of things. And so I just think it's remarkable that we have, since we came to Utah, almost all of our friends are not gay people. They're, they may be parents of gay people, but they're just people. And we're just all connecting as couples and people that share a common past.
Yeah, and the larger point that I want to emphasize to people who are listening, particularly if they're going through a faith crisis, or they are through one, is, find others. And I would point out that maybe just having a faith crisis in common may not be enough, but find others with similar values, authenticity, respect, caring, and that's where we have, the Coca, couples of a certain age, Mocha, men of a certain age, to make that effort to find friends by being a friend. And at the same time, though, I would say healthy friendships, that you need to be aware of that. Befriend those that you know are good for you and that you can be good in return to.
I love it. I remember when I was holding marriage workshops or couples workshops or retreats, having you two be the only, gay couple or same-sex couple, and how, like, I'm thinking this feels very different than the world I have normally lived in, but like almost in a really exciting boundary breaking way to just have, it's Gary and Ernie. And it's, what if we just stop thinking about the genders or the gender expression of the couples, and just, what if we just all enjoy each other however we show up? And I just, or karaoke's, like, so oftentimes the karaoke parties we've had, a bunch of straight couples and then Gary and Ernie, and just how much joy you two always bring to all these events, and how you model this love that many of us straight couples just really are thinking, wow, we could use a little bit more of that in our lives. It's been so beautiful to have you as a part of our community, just to all be in a community together. It's one of the beautiful things about the post-Mormon community to have you two in it, honestly.
Oh, thank you.
And it really, I think, speaks to the power of visibility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In our lives, like how
Right.
transformative that really is at, like what you were saying, Gary, this idea of blind spots, that we have blind spots that can live and breathe when they're in a vacuum or when they live unchallenged in our realities. And so, I mean, the idea of visibility is real. And that's, around, gender identity, sexual identity, all the things, right? All the expansiveness of just how humans show up in this world, in all the beauty and variation,
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I hadn't thought of it that way. But sure enough, we had an example of that only 3 weeks ago. Gary's niece asked me if I would perform the marriage, her and her fiance. And when I did, it was, where was it, Gary? Somewhere up in northern Utah. But I was aware that half the audience was TBM and half was not. And they
TBM
didn't know
meaning
who.
true believing Mormon,
Right.
Orthodox Mormon for those who aren't Mormon.
And,
what TBM means.
there wasn't a program to say who was going to be the minister. And so I performed the marriage. And what was interesting, you talk about visibility, a lot of people apparently said, hey, that was beautiful, that was wonderful, etc. And that night, for those who didn't know us, then they see, hey, the minister's dancing with this guy on the floor. What's going on? And some of their eyes were really big because they had never seen anything like that. But having the preface of a wonderful, first of all, experience that kind of humanizes me, it made a huge difference. And they started dancing with us, some of them. And I could tell that was the first time they'd ever seen two guys dance.
It was very healing to me, the dancing at the end of the day at the reception, because my brother was there that I was close to, and I said hi to him, and he didn't say anything else to me the rest of the night. And that's fine. I've kind of let go of that, and I respect his journey. But his kids were there, and his son wanted to give me his baby to hold, and it was just so beautiful. And my sister, who I adore very much and admire, but who is afraid of things, afraid of the world. She had her daughter, and her daughter joined our dance group. We had a big group of us dancing in a circle, and she was there dancing, and it was like I was a kid again and dancing with my little sister. And it just felt like that piece of me has just been healed a little bit by having that, just her dancing without being like wondering who's looking and is this okay? Am I encouraging something that I should be evil, or, all those things that. And then my brother John, who I haven't been close to, but it's really more because we don't live near each other, and he's kind of in between as far as the church goes. Anyway, he got up. He was, he was enjoying watching us dance. He was just really and I wasn't sure if he was, sometimes he likes to make fun of people as a joke tease. And then he got out and started dancing himself, and he just about fell over several times. But that was so beautiful, being able to dance with my brother and see that it was genuine. He really wanted to let us know that he was okay and loved to see us dancing, and he wanted to be a part of that. But yeah, that was a beautiful wedding.
Beautiful.
I have a quick question for you guys around, it feels like in many ways you have taken the time to create a new blueprint, for joy, for love, for so many things. And I thought I am very curious around, on some level, when you both, I feel like, have experienced real moments of suffering, extended periods of time where you were absorbing a lot of messages that were aggressive about who you are, about how to think of yourselves. And I'm just curious, how has it been? Are there practices? How would you describe the journey where you move and shift away? And I'll include the conditioning of the church too, because I think this idea of both of you trying to go to such great lengths to live the formula, and to make it work, that you are self-betraying and you're taking the hits to sort of so committed to what's been prescribed by other people for you. How did you make that shift from suffering to claim joy? To actually say, we're worthy of joy and we're claiming it now in our lives?
Well, I think it's been a process, and I think that Stoicism, even though that's more Ernie's philosophy, it really helps, because if you look at the glass half full or that glass half empty, it's the same glass, but you get a different emotional reaction. And it's been about process of how can I think of this in a different way that doesn't create such a negative outcome for me. I love my family, but what do I mean by love? I'm always trying to understand all these things. What do they mean by love when they tell me this, but they treat me this way? Am I showing respect for their beliefs? How do I do that? Can I do that better by not being around them? Reframing things instead of we never get together anymore, and they don't want their kids around me. That's kind of a negative way. How can I say, well, I love my sister and I know she's vulnerable and maybe I need to give her that and let her have the space, and that's my way of showing love. And I've got other sisters in my life now that I've just, Ernie's family has been so fun. We've had so many times getting together and playing music and dancing and jumping up in the air and doing our little line dancing, and it's just so bonding. And it's like, why should I suffer when there's so much beauty? I have the best life, I also have some things that could be the worst if I focused on them that way, but I think that's what a lot of Stoicism is really about, is reframing it and saying, this is not leading to the right outcome. I guess cognitive
behavioral
therapy does the same thing. They try to question the lens you're looking at, and how do you see it in a way that, I can't change them. I don't want to change them, but I need to resolve that a little bit so that I can have that space to. And so I don't know. I'm always kind of working with that, trying to find something.
I just might add, my family loves Gary, and I don't know if you've ever seen the Star Trek version where Spock goes back to Sacramento or in time, right? And he tries to swear, and it just doesn't fit. And my family, my nieces and nephews, have been trying to teach Gary to swear, and sometimes it's just like Spock. No, that's the wrong way. No, don't say it like that.
we
won't illustrate here. But anyway, getting to your question, Margie, I realized, and even in preparing for this, a thought came back to me of what I used to kind of do a little ritual with my kids. And I was trying to make at least 2 points. One, which has taken a lifetime for me to actually pin down, and the other, which has always been part of my life. But I would say to them, all right, now what's the most important thing in the world? And they would say, love, love. And I'd say, right. Now, who's the most important person to love? And they'd say, myself. That's the one that's taken a lifetime. And the other thing I would say now, trust me, but I swear that one of life's greatest blessings is having good friends. So then I would ask them, what's the secret to having a good friend? And they'd say, be one. And so, in a way, if you say, yes, there's always been this suffering, but now I look on it as almost instructive to me. And we don't have continued suffering, but rather joy. And if anything, maybe this is another way to put it, but like I grew up poor. And you know what? I value that. Why? Because I feel like my life is in such abundance now because I have this contrast. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, the joy that we experience, I'm at an ultimate high because I have known what it's like to be in the deep valley.
I read a study that compared older men, Hispanic men, black men, and white Caucasian men, and as they were aging and dealing with aging issues, and the white men were having the hardest time because, the probable reason why is because they'd always been in control and been able to push their way through, and these Hispanic and black men had spent a lifetime of dealing with unfair situations and trying to, and a lot of them had developed a lot of resilience and a lot of ways to, Ernie's dad was amazing, the way he just never took anything personal and just laughed and make a joke. And,
that's true.
And just
you can't afford
back.
to be offended. You got to stay resilient to just survive, right?
Yeah. What a great way to face the end of life. Is learning from those kinds of struggles, so that because we are going to fail, our bodies are going to start failing, and people aren't going to pay attention when we talk and might not think we're so cute anymore and look past us. And I don't know, there's all kinds of things that people deal with. But anyway, I'm very happy to have Ernie by my side through this part of their journey. It's actually just getting better and better. I know a lot of people think that a long-term, monogamous, committed relationship must be super boring. And, and it's just gotten better and better for us. And I think that maybe that's not the majority, but there's definitely a subset of couples that just get more and more free and just, learn to, their lives start to go smoother and smoother. My sister, Ernie, I'll just add one little detail. I think sometimes when my sisters talk to me, they say, Gary, how are you? And, I've had Crohn's disease. I've had a lot of pain. I've been to the hospital a lot. But I'm doing better now than I've ever done in my whole life. I'm happier. My body's healthier. And it's like they're inviting me to tell a sad story so they can be empathetic. And I'm like, at least that's the way it sounds to me when I hear that. How are you? And it's like they must imagine my life really bad and miserable. And it's like, I don't know what to say except, I'm doing good. I'm happy. But anyway, it's fun that sometimes relationships can get better and better. I know it's hard when people have kids and the money issues and where are you going to work out your relationship and communication? How can you fit all that in with all these demands? And relationships do go down when people have kids. And, but also nowadays they found that relationships in general are better because people get out of bad relationships. They didn't used to. They'd stick with it a lifetime of misery. And now you've got people in general, more happy couples together. So, and second and third marriages tend to be better on general. So anyway, I love the way we're living our life.
And I don't know if this makes any sense, but this is my experience. See, I think it's part of the journey of life. I'm still learning about myself. And so I continue to learn about Gary. We never arrive. And so it's not dull at all. And matter of fact, I'll learn some things and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And I remember when you were on the ex-Mormon cruise and you introduced us to the 5 love languages, and you said, I want you to jot down, and that's really informative and twofold. On understanding another person and figuring out yourself. And so I was surprised at that time. We basically are aligned. Gifts aren't that big of a deal with us. We don't keep anniversaries so that we can have a happy birthday 6 times a year or something like that. We just make it up. Right, Gary?
Yeah. Happy birthday, Ernie. I just ordered you something. So we do this all the time.
I love that idea.
Celebrating birthdays and anniversaries.
All year long.
Well, people get so tired. Like, you didn't remember this. If you really loved me. And I'm like, whoa.
Well, and what do you celebrate? Do you celebrate when we ran up to Vancouver to get married as I did a marathon? Or do you, when our friends put on a wedding for us in California? Or when we first moved in together and before gay marriage was allowed even? It's like you start to get, I think this is typical of our cohort of gay people, is they have several milestones that they could all celebrate. So anyway, we just celebrate all the time.
Love that.
COVID was a good time.
Much.
We did.
Yeah.
We'd go for walks and date twice a day, and I think that now I can work from home. It gives us a lot more time together. We love to exercise. We go hiking. We love to. Ernie doesn't seem to mind following my crazy ideas at times. So when we were in LA, I would say, well, you rollerblade and I'll jog. And so we'd start down at Palos Verdes or down at Torrance Beach, and we'd go all the way up to Santa Monica. And then we'd turn around and come back, and the last 4 or 5 miles in the dark and cold. And I'm like, oh, that was probably a bad idea.
50 miles.
But he never says no, and he's always going with me on these adventures, and he listens to me go on and on about, why would anyone want to hear for 2 hours me to talk about my academic research, and he never seems to tire of it, and he's always giving me more ideas, and now I bug him about my research, tell him about the Finnish family I can't find, or the Dutch death records, the death notices I'm translating, and anyway.
Beautiful.
I mean, really, how do you not?
I know. And everybody should have the experience of like karaokeing or dancing with Gary and Ernie, because you guys, you're kind of in your own world when there's dancing going on. What's that about?
That's actually accurate. We both kind of have decided that dance is the metaphor of life for us, because in a symphony, meaning you have your ups and downs and all kinds of challenges, and we adapt and move to it. And it's accurate to say that when we go to a party, just I don't know what it is, but we just love to go at it.
There's a lot of people want to dance,
and
once we start, then they start. And I want to say that in the heterosexual dancing, you have a leader and a follower, and the leader is the man and the follower is the woman. And so we did a lot of swing dancing in high school, and I try to swing Ernie, and he's going to try and swing me, and it's not going to go so well. We're not really professional enough to learn how to be the follower. And so we've kind of developed our own little lead and follow thing that is just really
That's
quite
true.
fun, where he follows me and I follow him, and we just dancing all over the place.
I'm so glad that you asked that, John, because it's, as you explain it, that is what it feels like to watch you. It's very fluid, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just a beautiful coming together. Yeah, I hope everyone, I would hope, I would wish for everyone to have the gift of seeing it. But anyway, we
went to the Ward's house last night for a ward party. Anyway, we won't say identities, but anyway, I thought, here's all these people. Initially, we didn't know anybody, and we got up and started dancing, and boy, everybody wanted to talk, and it was just such a fun party. Everybody just opened up, and dance is not just a metaphor for life, but it's a joint activity where you bond. Our interview is a bonding time. us telling our personal stories with you, I don't think we'll ever think the same way. You know, it adds to our relationship, but dancing does that too. When you're around a bunch of people, and especially when people want to dance too, and you know, actually we were up at Sundance and dancing. I mean, it's just amazing the way we can do things out in public. I'm not giving Ernie a chance.
I'm actually going to say I'm going to deviate here since I can, right? And we really appreciate that we live in modern times. But for modern technology and medicine and science, Gary would not be alive, and I would really, really be deprived of a life because of my hearing impairment, which is quite severe, and it's been 45 years. And where my deviation goes is I'd like to say to everybody, you do need to be aware. Dakota asks me to do a presentation on hearing loss. And I told them, I said, look, and they were surprised, most people are, when Helen Keller's, you know, she was deaf and blind, said, if we could restore one of those senses, which would it be? She says, that's easy. It would be hearing. And people are saying, what do you mean by that? She said, if you lose your sight, you lose touch with things. But if you lose your hearing, you lose touch with people. And so, hey, ladies out there or anybody, if you have a spouse or somebody that's not addressing this, then here's the one thing you need to know that I told the crowd. If you don't remember anything, remember this one thing about hearing loss. Untreated hearing loss now has shown to greatly increase the risk of the onset and the process of dementia and Alzheimer's. And part of that has to do, again, with community, because if you can't hear, you lose the ability to interact. And so, you know, I'm really glad I have these because it's gotten better and better. That's the other thing I want to tell people. Hey, this has really improved. This has got 22 channels. I can hear better than I could at 18.
So there's a commercial for hearing aids.
There's
for
a commercial
older
for
men and women that are in the audience.
And this idea of being responsible for your lives, right? We recognize, you know, there's a lot of knowledge out there. So we want to be healthy and we want to do things that contribute to our longevity. And so we read a lot and study up a lot, and this is why we do a lot of things. Although I hate the word exercise, kind of has a connotation of, I got to get out there. So what we do is we just engage in physical things that we enjoy. Rollerblading, hiking. We've been going to a Zumba class for 2 months now, and we're learning how to, you know.
do it as a group. It's so fun. I wanted to say something about his hearing aids because last week we were at a family, his Horseman's Hawk family, where was it, Capitol Reef? And Torrey. Anyway, so he's got these hearing aids. So we go up on a hike with his daughter's family to Lower Calf Creek. People know that area. And we're sitting there and, you know, enjoying the rest at the end of the hike before you head back. And Ernie can do remote Bluetooth to his hearing aids, his music. So often he'll start dancing and everyone's like, wow, look at Ernie, he's dancing. And sometimes I try to dance with him, but I don't have the music. So we were at Calf Creek on the sand there, and I started dancing with him a little bit. And this Hispanic lady was there watching us. She's like, what were you guys doing? Tell me about that. What was that? And so I explained to him, but I just thought it's really quite a fun thing that we love to do. I have some speakers, but we haven't figured out how to get him to go to his hearing aids and my speakers at the same time. So anyway, technology will figure it out soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. What I see so much with the dancing with you all that I love so much is, you know, oftentimes, we can get into our thoughts, into our heads. And that's good and beautiful and fun to explore, you know. And then there are also moments when it can be incredibly helpful to put it down and to dance and to get outside of our heads and to be in spaces of senses and connecting. And that's what I really, really see in the both of you, is that both of these spaces are very valued by you both and developed. And I think that balance is important, because I think oftentimes what you see is that, particularly in a transition space, is like that it gets so magnified. You just, it kind of shrinks, and in the time of questioning and breaking down, do you find this? I'm curious if you relate to this idea, but like it gets hyper-focused beliefs, and you're trying to figure it out, and the lens and the world just becomes so small. And what I'm seeing in this conversation with you both is, and there's a place for that, right? There's a place for, and a time and a working through. But eventually I wonder if part of healing isn't, and I see this in you when you go to gratitude and you're talking about when we live in the current times, but on some level, part of healing is realizing that was a small part, and to be able to pull out and have that bigger picture of life, that bigger, that will allow for dancing, that will allow for, the time and space that we inhabit now, as opposed to just this, will you speak to that for a minute? Because I see it so in both of you.
I agree. And being as extroverted as I am, I've learned from Gary the value of paying attention to me and going in my inner world. And so I'm a swimmer. And what I love about that is all I have to worry about is air, and I've swam enough that I don't even worry about that. But to give myself the opportunity to just back off and to have time for that space. And we do this sometimes with our walks, right, or with some activities we do. And it is significant because if you're always in your mind, and sometimes I wonder if there's a correlation here of what's going on, but apparently in the younger generations, there's an increase of anxiety, depression, social anxiety, and it's sad. And we have a lot of nieces and nephews. Well, I address that with them, and say, hey, what about, but this. So I like what you're saying. I think
it's kind of counterintuitive that being such intellectuals and thinking through all these heavy things, and here I'm a genealogist and I'm doing all this heavy research all day long. But it's kind of led us to a place where some things we thought mattered don't really matter anymore. And it's so freeing and fun to just run in the park. And, Ernie has got more of a kid in him than me, but I've tried to follow. And once I do, he'll run up the hill and I run up the hill behind him. It lets off these happy hormones or whatever they are, chemistry. And we were in the Zion's Narrows one time, and it's kind of busy on the trail there, but Ernie started running. I started following him, and we're moving our hands like this, and I'm moving my hands in his, and then pretty soon two other
Chinese kids
start doing it too, tourists that are following us. It just creates this happiness, and it's like, why don't we do that more? Why don't we run just for running? Ernie one time was just listening to his music, and he was running around the schoolyard next to our house and just having fun. And it just, we need that. I need that. And sometimes, and there is definitely a switch I find when I'm working and it's time to turn off work and try to let out the inner kid. Yeah.
Power of play.
Yeah, play is super important.
I just wanted to add to that there's like a scripture that I just say, okay, this is nonsense. This is wrong. And it's the one where it says, hey, you're an adult now, so you put childish things away. Oh, that's a great disservice to deny that, our own childhood and our own, I just think it's very wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. To see you two in action, there's a sense of joy and a sense of play and a sense of intimacy that's really inspiring. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on. All right. Well, I think we're a little past 3, but we're not quite at 4. I think it's probably
I have
time.
a final question,
Margie's
actually.
got a question.
I'm going to just slide it just in, just one final. And that is, when we partner, oftentimes that the health of that partnership also oftentimes is indicative of the health of the people involved, right? And so I guess I wanted to ask about your personal practices or things that you do. Gary, I remember at one point Ernie saying that you were telling Ernie to keep exploring or to keep, on your journey of. So, anything you want to share about things that help you show up individually in this way to build a healthier partnership and to keep yourselves kind of learning, healing, growing, feeling alive. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand fully. One thing that came to mind is that my sensitivity has increased over time. So where I might not have known there was a problem in the past, I usually pick up on signs much quicker now. So my sensitivity has increased. That's not what you mean.
So I love that insight, though. I feel like, so some examples of practices that I've noticed allow me to show up in a different way in my life. Some simple things I do are like I've started a meditation practice that I really enjoy. I try to get out in nature kind of regularly because I feel like it does something, it kind of relaxes my brain and allows it to see things from a wider lens, kind of like what I was saying when I can have a tendency to hyper-focus on certain things. Those are a couple examples of practices. Do you have anything or like reading is a big thing for me, like learning about.
I know for me, I like to give myself 20 minutes in the morning before I work to sit and read my philosophy book. That's kind of a peaceful time. Ernie has a trainer he goes to on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we've started adding Wednesday for Ernie on the dancing. And we try to do, I wouldn't say we do it every day, but at least every other day, do activity after work. So we go for a 10-mile bike ride around our neighborhood or just something to spend time together. We often walk to lunch together. And then we like to play racquetball together. And because competitive is not so good for us, we keep score because it's not as fun without score, but it's really about seeing how long we can keep that ball in play. So if we can return it 20 or 30 times, it's like, whoa, that was awesome. We're both happy, cheering for each other. But yeah, I think the Apple Watch has helped because it doesn't make that red circle all the way around until I get to 600 calories. And so usually by the time I'm done with work, I'm at 150. And so I have to find some way to make up the other 400 calories. And
motivation.
So it's like, okay, what do we want to do? Should we go for a hike tonight or should we go for a bike ride? And so we're always communicating that way. It's always an excuse to catch up on, he read something on the Facebook, I read something on the news. Little by little, you realize you have all kinds of things you need to talk about and resolve. What are we doing on the weekend? Do we schedule this or that? And
chances are you're hiking with the Baka voice.
You've heard about
the weekend plan.
Yeah, we love
you have other hiking companions.
Yep, we do. We love sharing that with other people too.
So for me, and let me first address something that Gary mentioned, because about 5 years ago, I met a trainer at a work party of his, and I decided I would try it. But for about the first 2 years, I felt it was a luxury, like people will spend money on a car or a purse or something that you kind of say, well, this is luxury. And now I don't define it that way anymore. I define it as an investment in me. And I would like to say, maybe sounds a little bit too, the payoff has been huge. I mean, in dancing or in snowshoeing or in hiking or in running or in swimming. And and so the benefits, and of course, me taking care of myself is good for our relationship and good for Gary. There's 14 years disparity between us, so if he's going to retire at 62, and that's in 8 years, then, I've got to keep myself
He'll be
a little bit active
76.
so I can keep up with him.
So, yeah, we're trying to live almost like a retired lifestyle, but, it's going to be a little hard that the age thing starts to make a bigger difference after midlife. And so we're trying to make the best of it we can.
And ironically, so far it hasn't. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this, and here I'm saying it, but, Bakaway will tell you he cannot keep up with me. I've got 18 years on him.
Yeah, Ernie's like a rabbit. He'll run up ahead, and then he'll come back, and he'll run up ahead and back and all around. And so, we're always teasing about Ernie's energy.
Well, you two have to go snowshoeing with us, since you mentioned that once. And
I
then
love snowshoeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do too.
And pick it up, Dave. Pick it up, Brother Dave. They'll literally show you up. That's awesome. Okay. Well, what a beautiful 4 hours, huh, Margie?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I hope you both feel, I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to share your stories. We sure have, and we're sure honored to be able to share your story. Any final thoughts or words before we close?
I just hope that we've shared some things that might be of benefit to somebody. Life's not always easy. We need to be there for each other, right? But it's been a privilege to get to share our stories. And, we're still writing it with this guy, I'm not going to trade him in, I've decided.
I'm having such a beautiful life right now. I know a lot of people can't hold their partner all night because the body heat or whatever, but I just love falling asleep with Ernie in my arms and then waking up with me in his arms or whatever. We roll around during the night, but whatever I missed during my teenage, young adult years, it's like I think I've just had an abundance of it since, and I just feel so full and happy being with this guy and sharing my life with him and adventures, and I'm so looking forward to facing the end of life together. Hope that something doesn't happen to stop that, but we do the best we can. I think the times I've been in the hospital, when he's been in the hospital, we're just totally there for each other. And we've had such a beautiful time. I think the best of Mormonism is what we see in our post-Mormon friends. They're the greatest part of our lives too. I want to recognize all of them because I know they're going to listen, and I wish we could name all of them by names, and we've named some of them, and I appreciate that. I'm glad that we had a chance to cover so much because, I've thought before in the past it'd be nice to talk about this or that, and I thought, well, we're not going to get to that in this short time, but we got through most of it. I think there's not a lot of things on my list that didn't get said, and there were a lot of things that I didn't have on my list, so.
That got said.
That got said. So this has been a beautiful experience. Thank you. And thanks to your audience. We want to put a plug in for Mormon Stories. We are supporters, and we
Definitely.
As long as John can be doing this, and Margie and the others that are out there podcasting, I think it's a beautiful thing to have a support system and a way for people to start connecting and getting validation for what they're feeling and their issues.
This commercial is brought to you by Gary and Ernie.
Yeah, let's live the best life we can. This is what we know we have. We know we have, and we're going to try to live our life accordingly.
Yeah, and I might add that one of the joys in our life is the nieces, nephews, grandnieces, grandnephews. We really advocate education, so we like to support them, and I really get a fulfillment out of any time I can help enlighten or encourage youth, because it is hard. And our complex world has gotten harder to some degree with Facebook and all of these different ways and attentions.
I think a religion gives children a safe, comfortable place to build a self-esteem and to go out with ambition and conquer the world. And I think sometimes it's hard to give kids that when you have ambiguity and you understand how complex the world is. And that's really a big deal for childhood, secure attachment styles. And I think it's really hard. Some of our ex-Mormon friends are struggling. They have depression, they have anxiety, and they maybe wouldn't have as much if they lived in a world that made as much simple sense as they would get in a religion. So it's a tough thing, and I hope we, they find friends, get community. This is really important. One thing I wanted to say too is this word of wisdom thing. We have such a different, but we have a word of wisdom. We have our own word of wisdom. We watch our calories. We try to exercise. We want to have fun and dance class and all these things. So I think this idea that if you leave Mormonism, you're going to go become a drunk, and you're going to stop supporting your family, you're going to try and have all the fun and drugs and sex you can, and then you're going to die and you're going to be miserable. And it's like, no, that's not our world. We're about having the most optimal life we can, which means maybe less ice cream, maybe less chocolate, and maybe darker chocolate or finer chocolate. But it's not just this. Anyway, we're rambling. Thanks, John, Margie.
Love it.
I like that. We have our own word of wisdom. Gosh darn it.
We do.
Love it.
We do.
Optimal life.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we feel your joy, and we feel lucky to witness and feel your love too. So thank you for sharing your story with us today. It's been a gift for us, for sure.
Thanks for letting us tell our story and putting it out there for people that can benefit.
And Margie, thanks for making this one happen. You were the producer behind this one, so thank you.
Absolutely.
It's great to have you as partner in this.
In the mix.
In the mix, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, babe.
Love you. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Margie. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Thanks to everyone who donates like Gary and Ernie do to make all this possible. If you want to support us, you can at mormonstories.org. Click on the donate button, become a monthly donor, and we'll provide you with this type of content. This is kind of a Thrive episode, so to speak, but we'll keep providing you great stories for as long as you're willing to support us. So support us if you can. Be good to each other, be kind to each other, love each other. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.